Oh shit. Good afternoon. We're midway through January, and this new year so far has thrown up some big sporting stories. Obviously, what we saw in the NFL with the Bengals Bills game, and the impact that game has now had on the playoff structure going forward for the NFL for this year's Super Bowl. Has thrown up some interesting dynamics. Now, the NFL were damned if they did, they were damned if they didn't. So, if you are an NFL fan, you know, with what's happened with the match being completely cancelled, abandoned, and obviously not going to be replayed, um, that dynamic is interesting. It's great to see the player making a good recovery and is recovering well, but it does raise the question of athlete welfare, and you know, uh, we still are yet to determine what caused the incident where the player has to leave on a stretcher after suffering cardiac arrest. But several scary incidents like that have happened in several sports over the last couple of years. So there's that debate about health screening and player insurance, and look with Christian Eriksen returned to play following what happened at Euro 2020, and yes, took some time out, re-signs with Brentford. Obviously, can't play in Italy for insurance purposes. Goes on to play for Man United. So there is the possibility that, all being well, the Bills player returns to play. We shall see. In footballing news, obviously the FA Cup third round has taken place. A few matches will be going to replay. There are several managers under a lot of pressure right now, most notably Frank Lampard, Graham Potter, and to a certain extent Jurgen Klopp. Managers under a lot of pressure, and I'm surprised that at this point in the season we haven't seen more managerial casualties in that regard. But Chelsea is the really interesting one. Liverpool as well, quite interesting. Now, the Graham Potter situation, what I find very, very interesting is Chelsea have got worse and Brighton have got better with the managerial changes there. And Brighton breezed through the third round of the FA Cup, played very, very well in a very dominant performance. Chelsea just dismantled by Manchester City last weekend. And then losing to Fulham as well, in the manner they did, raises further questions about what's happening within the dressing room, what's happening with tactics, question marks over the structures at the club under Todd Bowley, the new owner, um, and the fact that the fan base is restless. The fan base has got very used to success. The issue with Chelsea, though, is the win now mentality. Now, with other clubs, they take their time with their managers a little bit and are a bit more patient. What we've seen with Chelsea under the Abramovich era, at least, and even before the Abramovich era, was there was that lack of patience with the manager to build anything. And it didn't matter if you won silverware or not; you were very quickly out the door. The average time of a manager at Chelsea since the 90s is around 18 months. So there's not really an identifiable style of play, an identifiable culture within the team, direction, and the win now mentality. I think can only take you so far. The Liverpool situation with Jurgen Klopp. Well, I don't know what really to make of that. They're having another below acceptable season. And deficiencies with the Liverpool system have been highlighted by the manner of some of their performances. The game against Wolves has thrown up a lot of question marks over VAR as well, and that's a separate debate about do we want the game to flow or do we want to get the decisions right? And in both cases, VAR had a malfunction at Anfield. Not the first time this season that's been the case, and it's a difficult one, and we're having this debate in other sports as well with the technology and do we have get the game to flow, get the decisions right. what kind of balance do you strike there? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But with VAR, the amount of time it took football to introduce the technology, and now how it's been implemented, and its remit, and what it's looking at, and the interpretation of rules, throws up other complications. So that is in itself quite interesting, the dynamic, um, with VAR. But the Liverpool and Chelsea situations are very, very interesting. Now, Jurgen Klopp has been at Liverpool now for quite some time. He's had a fair bit of success, with a fair bit of silverware. Um, Obviously, Man City are still the most successful club in the last 6, 7 years. Um, However, Man City, I think, are showing some vulnerabilities as well. Newcastle, playing the manner they are and reaching a League Cup semi-final. Yes, the surprising defeat to Sheffield Wednesday in the FA Cup is, tempered expectations, but their run of form has been fantastic. Eddie Howe, there was a lot of question marks over his appointment as manager and whether that was a short-term appointment or whether they're going to stick with him long term. I think they're going to stick with Eddie Howe long term, I would assume. And of course, Arsenal having a resurgence under Mikel Arteta, considering that 12 months, 18 months ago, there were calls to get rid of Arteta, and Arsenal were in crisis. So the top of the table has been changed, and then you look down the table, and there's some clubs that shouldn't be in the position they're in, and Fulham have been a surprise this season. Brighton have been a surprise this season in the positive. So English football's getting interesting. On another note, a club that I've done several videos on, Scunthorpe, have had a winding up order from HM Revenue and Customs due to unpaid taxes and debts, and of course they fell out the Football League. There was you know a great discussion about that alongside Oldham, and both those clubs are now at the bottom of the National League table, staring relegation out the top flight of the non-league into National League North in the face, and also facing the possibility of going out of business as well. So, what is very, very interesting is football is at a big crossroads. Obviously, the Football League, the Premier League, and the FA had their meeting in regards to the future direction of club football in this country. I do believe this is the last year we will see any FA Cup replays. So, lower league clubs and non-league clubs obviously will be impacted in some way. So revenue sharing and making sure the competition's integrity is obviously kept is going to be a very interesting subplot, I have no doubt. And we'll have to see what occurs. Now, obviously, today we've got the Manchester derby between City and United. That's going to be a bit of a feisty one. It seems post Ronaldo that Manchester United seem to be improving under Eric Ten Hag. Weghorst, his signing, that's created some debate. Obviously, his time at Burnley didn't go very well, and it will be interesting to see how Ten Hag fits him into the system he wants to implement at Manchester United. I think Man City are not as invincible as people think they are. They lost against Southampton 2-0 in the League Cup quarter final against a struggling Southampton side in the league. Southampton are rock bottom of the Premier League. And so there's some question marks over some of the squad depth at Man City. And, Haaland being kept goalless. So that's something. Haaland hasn't scored a goal since the World Cup. So since play's resumed, Haaland hasn't scored, which is quite interesting. And that includes that 4-0 demolition of Chelsea. Haaland wasn't on the score sheet. So there's definitely a lot of narratives at play within the English game. And it will be very interesting to see, obviously, the outcome of the season. I wasn't overly convinced with Arsenal's performance in the FA Cup last weekend. They win the game 3-0, but I wasn't overly convinced with how Arsenal approached that match and the energy levels and the performance of the players that were selected. But Arsenal are doing quite well in the league. I think Newcastle, I think they'll benefit by not being in the FA Cup, and maybe the League Cup can be that continuous momentum that Newcastle will need. I think Newcastle got a very good chance of actually winning the League Cup. I mean, they haven't won a trophy since 1955. and that will be that first piece of silverware under the new ownership. And with Eddie Howe as manager, they've been brilliant over the last 12 months since he was appointed as manager. And there was a lot of criticism aimed at his appointment, as I say, and he's proving those critics wrong, and Newcastle are in a very healthy position. The Chelsea situation is the one I want to really focus on because I think Jurgen Klopp, I think he will be managing Liverpool next season. Graham Potter, however, I don't know. I don't know whether Potter is going to be the guy there at the end of the season. And then we've got Frank Lampard at Everton and the constant theorising and debating around his position following really poor run of form. They're in the bottom three. They narrowly avoided relegation last season. And there's a lot of pressure. I mean, Gerrard's lost his job at Villa, and they've been knocked out of the FA Cup. So some of these young English managers, I think Eddie Howe's having the best fist of it right now. Gerrard's, it didn't work at Villa. Lampard, it's not working at Everton, and Graham Potter, while it was working at Brighton, it's clearly not working at Chelsea for whatever reason. So there's a lot of pressure now on the current Chelsea ownership, the new ownership, to stick or twist. There's clearly issues within that dressing room. Now, the reasoning behind Tuchel's departure is up in the air. There's a lot of innuendo surrounding that. There's a lot of speculation about why Tuchel ended up getting out the door. Um, and and unless that is made public, we will never know. We can only speculate. But what is very notable with Thomas Tuchel, he's a very successful manager. He doesn't stay at clubs very long. He tends to burn bridges along the way with his style of management and his hands-on approach to things, or his approach to squad selection and transfers. And you look at his time at PSG and Dortmund, he wasn't there very long, and he's out the door. So there is a clearly a reason why Todd Bowley would not keep a successful manager. But there is growing discontent with Chelsea fans and the direction Chelsea's taking. There's clearly a massive discontent at Everton. And I think there are certain murmurings around Anfield with Jurgen Klopp. I think Jurgen Klopp is the least likely of the three to lose his job. We've seen other managers go. Houston Hart at Southampton, considering he signed that lengthy contract extension only a couple of years ago, he's gone. They're bottom of the league, and they're not seeming to get any better. Scotty Parker, another young manager, he had a disastrous opening to the season with Bournemouth, and obviously openly criticising the club's board and ownership and direction at the time. He got the job. They've now got new ownership, so there are a lot of subplots going on. This season has been quite interesting so far. I think playing the second round of the FA Cup during the Football World Cup might have been an error of judgment, but they had no other option, I think, to get those fixtures played by the FA. Less eyes on the product, less fans in stadiums, for example. And of course, then we see, obviously, these speculations surrounding Gareth Southgate. He's going to be there until the next Euros, unless something seriously interesting happens. I think England did slightly underperform at the World Cup, but considering where England were when Southgate took over to where they are now, I think it's an improvement. The Hockey World Cup, field hockey. Yes, a sport I think doesn't get the attention it possibly should deserve. But again, when you're in a very congested sports market, there's a limited amount of interest in what I call minor sports in a certain sports market. So in the UK, for example, it's football, soccer, depending on where you are in the world, which gets the media attention, which gets the TV deals and the media internet rights and the broadcast rights, streaming services and such. And so and then when you look at the next batch of sports, it doesn't feature as highly with participation, fan base, sponsorship, funding, and it does slot in a bit lower down. It's look. I played field hockey. Did I enjoy it? I enjoyed being a goalie, but I didn't enjoy being an outfield player. Partly because I didn't have the skill set. I I have mixed memories of playing it at school. Some of my friends were very, very good at playing it. and we're in the firsts for hockey and all that. Played at tournaments. Went through the UK and England systems or whatever system they were part of. But for me, it wasn't a sport that I overly enjoyed playing unless I was in goal, and it was an optional sport as well at school. You could choose um, to after a certain period what sports you wanted to play, and so not many, it, and then that then creates an issue. But we are as an island nation, as the UK as a whole, quite good at it historically. At the Olympics and Commonwealths and things. um, we've got some great rivalries in the sport as well with some other nations, and it is a really interesting sport that I think globally needs more attention, and possibly looking at the funding, and then that's with national governments or the IOC or the federation itself trying to get those media partnership deals, trying to get those sponsorship deals, um, those positive media coverage. But then, as we've seen in recent years, the mainstream media has been heavily criticised for how it reports things. We're seeing a change in viewing habits when it comes to professional sport. We're seeing a push for more free to air coverage of sport as well. And we're seeing the internet and streaming services um, having a bigger role to play when it comes to viewership and how we view sport. So while England have beaten Wales, I haven't seen much media coverage on the Hockey World Cup, barely any. When I check my news feed and check the sports websites, I haven't seen much reporting on a World Cup. Um, and I think the world sports media is, I think, feeling a little bit fatigued as well. We've just had two World Cups literally in the space of a month. Um, yeah, but that's BT Sports. So if you're not a BT Sports customer, you're not getting that coverage because they're clearly got the ones who've got the rights for the UK. You're not getting that coverage, and I haven't seen it widely reported on any other sports pages at all. I wasn't even aware it was on. So, and I'm meant to be a sports YouTuber. I mean, look at that. But it's not a sport that I enjoyed playing. I will occasionally watch it, like say the Olympics or the Commonwealths, if it's on. But I think it does deserve better coverage. Putting it behind a paywall, I think, is a bad error of judgment. Although BT Sport may have offered more money for the product, less eyes on the product. So it's a toss up. Do you want to get more recognition for your sport by having it on a national free to air broadcaster, or do you want to take the slightly extra value of the broadcasting contract with a subscription service, but you get less eyes on your product to then later down the line breed that next generation of players and fans? It's a toss up. Do you take the money, or do you take the growth of the fan base, which ultimately leads to more money? Short term financial gain over long term gain. Um, no, I promised a haircut. I will not be getting any further body modifications at this time. I think at 2,000, I've got to wear a Burnley shirt. Where I'm going to source a Burnley shirt from is going to be interesting. Not that I'm looking forward to it. 1,000, the hair comes off, and the beard. So the Jesus look disappears, and then we go back to the This Is England '88 look, which may or may not ruffle some feathers. Um, well, I've been growing my hair for 2.5 years. It's getting to the point now where I can't even sleep properly without it like trying to kill me. But it is what it is. What I found very interesting earlier, the last week or so, I've been looking at obviously the channel analytics, the channel data, and where people are viewing from. And obviously, Australia and the US are joint second for viewership all time uh, in the channel's history and channel's existence. And obviously, in the last 12 months, apparently, I'm very popular in Kidderminster and Redditch in the Midlands, in the West Midlands, and Grimsby on the North Sea coast. So there you go. So some very interesting stats have been thrown out looking on the YouTube studio. So I'm very interested to see where viewers are viewing from. I know that in order, when it comes to figuring out data and all that, the YouTube studio is limited in a certain extent. And I know people use VPNs, and we also you can have the option to take away your tracking cookies and turn off your location and all that. So that does give a sort of um, it affects how the data is collected. But those who put their location as public and put that on their app, it's quite interesting. Um, yes, yes, yes. My initials was RJ saying yes. I did have a car drive past me the other day. So look, it's Jesus, and I said, "Have a blessed day." Um, yes, I do own the Jesus look. Personally though, like I do need a haircut. Like my hair goes all wavy in the rain. That's why I got it in the ponytail, so I can actually see what I'm doing. It's absolutely dreadful weather. We're meant to have snow at some point in the next few days. Temperature's going to drop off a cliff. We're going to have another cold spell. I was looking on social media, and there's been a whole host of matches in both professional and non-league football across the UK postponed due to the bad weather we've had, either for snow or waterlogged pitches. So various leagues throughout the footballing pyramid are going to have to scratch their heads, considering the congested nature of the season with the fact that the Football World Cup took place when it did. Fixture congestion is going to go mad. The Roy Keane beard, yes. Well, Roy Keane right now has got the porn star mustache. Looks a little bit 80s porn star, but yes, Roy Keane rocks the beard during the World Cup until the final. Um, I think I'm not sure I would suit a Roy Keane beard with a short hair. We'll have to see how that plays out. That could be quite interesting. But I've gone through several different looks in the channel's history. The baseball cap look. We've worn beanies. We've worn hoodies. We've had the long hair. We've had the skinhead. We've had the gelled hair. We've not had my hair funky colours, and we've not had mohawks and ducktails and proper mullets, although I could class this as a mullet. We are getting to the point now where I could be an Alabama redneck, but we're not quite there yet. But no, the interesting thing, and as I say, looking at the analytical data, if I'm looking at where I'm most popular all time, the city of Auckland in New Zealand, apparently, I have a lot of views in. Country wise, yeah, the US and Australia and New Zealand outside of the UK are quite popular. And what I was really surprised about was the fact that London was not the most popular location to view me from, considering that, yes, I'm based in the UK. Yes, I'm based just literally only about 30, 40 miles west of Greater London. And that, on a viewership standpoint, London wasn't the most popular location to view me from. I just find that interesting. I find that a really interesting dynamic. Um, and that stunned me a little bit. That London was not the top location all time, and even on the all-time data, it's not the top location. The last year, it's not the top location. So that was really interesting. Um, that may change with the Six Nations, with matches at Twickenham and England playing at home. That may change as the year progresses. There may be a football club in London where there's a managerial change, most likely at Chelsea, I would have thought. And let's say if Arsenal win the FA Cup or the league, and I do a video on that, I could get some big views. Auckland, yeah, look, obviously Mount Smart Stadium is in the Auckland metropolitan area. It's not the only location where the national side of New Zealand in rugby league play, but it's where the New Zealand Warriors are based, the only NRL team from New Zealand. And there's a big Pacific Island community, Polynesians in Auckland. So there's a big Samoan and Tongan community. So when I do videos in the past and on rugby league, so, in uh, 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 in regards to the 2017 World Cup, like obviously Tonga did really well. The viewership figures for that are insane. And of course, we've got the Women's Football World Cup, which is taking place in Australia and New Zealand in the summer. That's going to be quite interesting to see how that dynamic works out, and how, with the US having a very good side and Australia co-hosting New Zealand, how that changes the viewership dynamic and the percentage of viewers from those countries. But yeah, Auckland is the hub of rugby league in New Zealand. But they play league across New Zealand. Same with Union. Both codes, the nation is rugby mad. Doesn't matter if it's Union or league. There's a reason why the All Blacks are the best rugby union side in the international level of all time. There's a reason why, obviously, when it comes to rugby league, the Kiwis are quite good as well, and most of their best players play in the NRL. The issue that I think New Zealand has its population base and the corporate side of it, and we'll see what happens. How long time no see? SBS soccer coverage. Martin Tyler. Um, yeah, Martin Tyler. I mean, if you look at online, um, yeah, very mixed reviews of him online. My demographic is white Brit. No, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I do think that if you take the UK out of it with subscribers and viewership, I've got a very look at the viewership. I've got a very diverse. I would have thought viewership base. Um, I wouldn't say I was demographic white Brit. I think when we look at what's happening right now um, with the sport, yes, the managers under pressure are white, absolutely. Like, uh, the clubs that are under pressure, like Graham Potter at Chelsea, Frank Lampard at Everton, Klopp to a certain extent at Liverpool. Now Klopp is German, so he's obviously foreign, but I think I could do a video on Viv Anderson. I could do a video on Ian Wright. I could do a video on Andy Cole, um, and the careers of these players. But unfortunately, when you're you're in a country where the main demographic is Caucasian as a background, it is what it is. Thomas Frank, Brentford are doing quite well. The Ivan Toney situation is going to be interesting when the FA's finished their investigation and what length of ban he's going to get. We know he's going to get a suspension. It's a question of how long he gets suspended for, and will that impact Brentford's season and into next season? But Brentford are playing quite well. They're in a healthy position right now in the league. I think they're doing better than what people expected when they first got promoted. I think a lot of people thought they would be one and done and do like a Barnsley or and only have the one, or a Blackpool and only have the one season in the top flight and then go back down into the Football League. They're doing the opposite. So that's, I think, a real refreshing state of play. Um, in regards to Martin Tyler, I mean, look, we've seen a lot of criticism about Alex Scott on the BBC, and I think that's fair criticism against Alex Scott. And I criticise Alex Scott not because she's female, it's because she's crap. But then I look at some of the male commentators, and it's not much better. What happens when you criticise a female commentator from a minority background? You're labelled a racist and a sexist. But if I was to criticise Dion Dublin, who I actually find quite refreshing, by the way, and Micah Richards, I really like Micah Richards, it doesn't get the same negative connotations and response. We have got some shocking male commentators and some shocking pundits. And then you have those really passionate pundits who played the game at a high level, won trophies, like Micah Richards, who should be nowhere near a microphone. And to me, I'm not fussed if a woman's commentating on men's sport. It doesn't bother me. I've grown up with Gabby Logan and uh, Claire Balding, Susie Perry in the MotoGP. I've grown up with some of the best female commentators and presenters of sport this country has ever seen, and the world has ever seen. It all comes down to ability. Martin Tyler is no John Motson. Let's be clear on that. Motti made plenty of errors. I look at the F1. I don't watch it anymore, but I look at the F1. Jake Humphrey is not even close to a Murray Walker. And that's the presenting team. Martin Brundle's been painful for 25 years. I'm shaving my hair off for 1,000 subs. But Martin Tyler, I think he's knowledgeable in the game. I think it's his delivery. But then some of the colour comment, you got the play-by-play, which is your Martin Tylers, and you get the colour commentator, which would be a Martin Keown or a Jermaine Genius or whoever. Dean Ashton's quite good. I think Dean Ashton is very underrated. He's very well spoken, very calm. He doesn't get overly excited. He's a very good co-commentator, or color commentator is the term they would use in North America, alongside the play-by-play. Now, again, as a pundit and on the radio with Talksport, I like Dean Ashton. I think he's a very, very, very good ex-pro who's transitioned to the media very, very well. The Spurs situation, look, Spurs, there's been a lot of criticism aimed at Daniel Levy. Daniel Levy is just the chairman. He's not the actual owner of the club. He has a stake in the club. I don't think it's going to be a full takeover by Qatar. It will be a minority stake. Spurs are clearly looking to plug some of their financial issues. And when I say plug some of their financial issues, they overspent on the stadium and they haven't won any silverware, and they've really spent badly in the transfer market. So they've overspent in the transfer market. And they've got less financial clout than, let's say, Man City and Newcastle. And they're not bridging that gap to Man City, Newcastle, and Arsenal, to a certain extent, Liverpool. Liverpool have spent so in that regards, it's but look, there's rumours surrounding Man United and Liverpool as well, with potential partial or full sales. It's rumour mill until the actual ownership group at Spurs, of which Levy is a part, publicly says the club is publicly up for sale. We are speculating, and speculation can be very, very dangerous, and it can lead to false narratives. And the media are very good at speculating over what a player's future might be, or a contract, or a manager, or a club. They're very good because it sells newspapers, it sells clicks on websites, which means advertising revenue, which means sale revenue. If you are a subscriber to a sport like the Athletic, it means revenue. It creates interest. The media is very good at spinning a narrative. If it does happen, is it a good or bad thing? I think the narrative needs to be we need to seriously discuss a UEFA wide salary cap system and a spending cap system, because I believe the economy of scale is not right. It is a false economy. It reminds me of the subprime mortgage crisis, which is an economic thing, which I could cover on the other channel, which led to the financial crash of the late 2000s, which we are still technically feeling the effects of all these years later. So I'm not sure if it's going to be a good or a bad thing. Spurs have proven themselves with a billionaire owner that they can't win fuck all. And I've got to be careful with my swearing now, because YouTube are clamping down on foul and abusive language when it comes to monetization and age rating videos. Get a boo boo. But in jokes aside, Spurs have spent a lot of money. They've sacked a lot of managers. They've built a new stadium that went well over budget. And they still can't win silverware since 2008. So it's been a long time, and 15 years. And that's part of the problem, is there's been this lengthy spell. There you go. Yeah, well, look, there's rumours surrounding Man United. There's rumours surrounding Liverpool. There's rumours surrounding Spurs, but no actual concrete facts. Now, an owner can say, yeah, we're opening up to potential investment for a minority stake, or we're putting the club on the stock exchange, so we can still sell shares in the club for a dividend. So that could that's happened with Newcastle and Man United. They were on the stock exchange in the late 90s. So there's various ways of raising capital for a business. In regards to the fact that they were both linked to the Super League, or all three of them were yeah, they were. All three clubs were linked to the Super League, and it was very, very embarrassing when that collapsed for them. And their fan bases just basically told them to do one. And the Man United fans, regardless of the fact that Eric Ten Hag has managed to get this team competitive again and not too far off the top with his managerial style, the issues at Man United with the ownership structure are still there. And while he's having a decent first season in English football, he's had some missteps along the way, and there's been the Ronaldo situation. Now, why did Ronaldo come back? What was the thinking behind that? Who really made that transfer happen, that contract happen? What assurances was Ronaldo given? The manager's changed in that time. Was that a Glazer decision to sell merchandise, or was that actually a footballing decision? So there are still some question marks over the ownership structure at Manchester United. The fan base is still anti-Glazer, regardless of what the Man United is the darling of the British media, by the way. Regardless of what the mainstream media say, and they try and paint it as a minority protest movement. It really isn't, and it never has been. The fact that a whole new club was set up in protest at the Glazers' ownership. Liverpool, the Fenway Sports Group, a year ago, they bought the Pittsburgh Penguins ice hockey team to add to their portfolios. They spent a lot of money in the US purchasing another sports entity. So they obviously want to recapitalise and gain investment without them having to spend too much money pumping back in. Um, in regards to Spurs, I mean they've been a basket case for a while. Haven't really had a lot of success. Yes, they got to a Champions League final and were appalling, and they had I believe Spurs had a very small window to be successful, and that's passed. Um, so there we go. Yes, I am aware of the Field Hockey World Cup, but it's only on BT Sport, which limits the viewership that competition is going to get. I also think that the global sports media is a little bit lethargic after two major World Cups last year. Obviously, with the Football World Cup being an odd time of year and the Rugby League World Cup being delayed by a year, there was some big major sporting tournaments in a very short space of time where the world's international media from all over the world was focusing their attention on specifically the Football World Cup in Qatar and to a certain extent the Rugby League World Cup as well, both men's and women's all being played at the same time. So the sports media is, I think, a bit fatigued, and the fact that it's taking place in India. But look, Qatar is in a similar time zone, and we worked around it, and it wasn't a bad timing of matches and kickoffs. I managed to watch the majority of games at the World Cup. I thought the kickoff times with the European market, I think the Qatari organisers got that right, or FIFA got that right. I had mixed views on how the World Cup went. I think the anti camp were very, oh, this is crap, and the pro camp were very, this is really good. I mean, actually, in reality, that World Cup was sort of sits in the middle for entertainment and sits in the middle, I think, for outcome. And is it the best World Cup of all time? No, it's none of the above. It's sort of in the middle. It's not the worst World Cup I've ever seen. It's not the best I've ever seen for me personally. My views on that tournament were it was decent. It was different, but I think global professional sport is at a crossroads about the direction it takes for funding and where it hosts major tournaments. And are things like the World Cup and the Olympics becoming a bit more of a curse than a benefit? Um, so there's that. But no, I used to watch the IPL when it was on free to air TV, and I didn't mind the time zone difference with the day night matches. I felt it worked quite well. But then, TV companies and the cricketing authorities got really, really greedy and shot themselves in the foot. A luxury tax in soccer, would it be in UEFA enforced or Premier League enforced? I think a salary cap and a spending cap has to be the way to go. The luxury tax system doesn't work. Look at Major League Baseball as an example. Um, just look at Major League Baseball with their luxury tax system, and you work out when you're in a sports market, so the US and Canada, the other major leagues all have a salary cap, and it all works more effectively. So the luxury tax system doesn't work. Yes, I heard about the player having the NFL player having the cardiac arrest. One of my subscribers is from the US, messaged me, and I watched it on the way to work, and he is recovering. Several similar incidents have happened in other sports, in contact sports, and obviously Christian Eriksen's the most recent one of what I would describe as a similar incident, although not really. Chris Pronger in the NHL, a similar incident way back when. He went on to have another 12, 13-year career after that and won a Stanley Cup. So the chances of him returning to play are good. It depends on the muscular damage to the heart and other health issues that may have resulted from what happened. So we'll see what happens. I'm not well. Look, I'm not a Man United or Man City fan, so I have no interest in the match. If that was an FA Cup match, I'm watching it, obviously, because it probably most likely be 3-1 the big games of the round. If that was an FA Cup tie, obviously the League Cup is no longer on free-to-air coverage, which I think is ridiculous. But no, the fact that that is a big match of the weekend, but I'm not watching it. No. Australia, Belgium, and the Netherlands are the top three teams. I'm surprised India aren't ranked higher in the global rankings, considering it's actually field hockey, not cricket's the national sport. More people play field hockey than cricket, although the IPL is starting to change that narrative. Um, the Bahrain Darts Masters have the atmosphere of a morgue. Look, to me, darts I'm not interested in anymore. I haven't been for quite some time. A lot of my work colleagues are, and that's fair play to them. A lot of them play in the pub leagues and such, and that's fine. I've got mates who play in the professional rankings, and that's fine. To me, though, not a sport I've enjoyed for some time. But taking an event such as darts or like boxing to a country like Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or whatever it was, to me, yeah, we'll see what happens. But I don't think culturally it's a wrong move. I understand why these Gulf states try and diversify their economies from natural gas and oil. I completely understand that from an economic standpoint, and they want to diversify their investments, and that's what a government of a country wants to do. Is trade is important. Um, you know, getting outward investment, is important. But to me, the way they're going about it and the way certain sports. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. With I think it's now 12 players implicated. Um, Something that I think we could cover more. Um, Apparently, my connection's unstable. It's not just you. Um, it's the bloody internet again. Surprise, surprise. My internet connection is deciding to be crap again. Surprise, surprise. But in regards to the snooker allegations, they're troubling. They are troubling, and we're seeing a rise in them since the Hearns have really driven snooker to the direction it's taken. And yeah, it's a troubling situation with the international game of snooker. And my connection is not unstable. I've got full signal. Fuck off. So snooker's in a crossroads right now, and the allegations against these players, are they corrupting snooker? I wouldn't say. I think because the Hearns have chased the quick buck and they put profit over integrity, and that's my personal opinion, and other people can disagree. Um, I wouldn't say individual. I mean, I wouldn't lay blame at individual players, but there's clearly a culture within the sport because European players and Australian players have been implicated in the past as well. So it's not just Chinese players that have been implicated or ever. Um, we've discussed the history of the sport. I've discussed this as well with match fixing allegations in snooker. It's not just Chinese players. Make that clear before, um, regardless of what the mainstream media and what they try and spin on it. There is clearly an issue. It is troubling. We have seen. I think Stephen Lee is the biggest ban we've seen, 10-year ban. But John Higgins has been implicated. Maguire has been implicated. And some lesser ranking players have been implicated as well. But we can go back as far as Stephen Lee with match fixing and corruption. and he took a 10-year ban. Then we look at the Stuart Bingham betting ban. So there's clearly a culture within the sport where the governing body isn't doing enough. Um, and it's troubling. I do not want to see the fact that, okay, at the moment it's Chinese players. I don't particularly want to see the that a particular nationality is corrupting sport, because that's how you get that political and racist narrative in the media. Um, but it is troubling that the majority of the players that are implicated in match fixing come from China or Hong Kong. It is troubling. And then you have to raise the question of the culture within the sport in China. Um, and what we've seen with other sports in Asia, especially in the Far East with corruption, it is quite troubling that organised gangs, because gambling is actually technically illegal in mainland China and is only legal in Hong Kong and Macau. We have seen corruption in sport uh, over there. It is troubling, and it's a cultural thing, and it's a political issue, and it's a problem. But I think World Snooker and unfortunately the Hearn family have chased short-term profit over the integrity of the sport for a long time. Um, Bloody hell. Stupid connection being allegedly unstable. Leeds fans bring great atmosphere. Yes, they do. There's that ongoing joke online that Leeds, will bring 10. Leeds would have brought more when we look at packed away ends and crowd attendances. I don't know about how many tickets Cardiff are going to be given for the replay. I'll have to see what date the replay is meant to be played, but that's going to be a televised game. Has to be. Premier League club at home, FA Cup replay. There's a fair few replays. I think the Wolves Liverpool game is going to be interesting as well at Molineux, considering the VAR aftermath and was the game officiated well. We'll see how many people pack into Ellen Road for the replay. There's a few replays that look really interesting. Leeds were lucky on the day. And Aston Villa losing to Stevenage. There's a big shock. And Aston Villa are a club that are looking a bit ropey as well, although they win well last night. Get a good win in there. Game is played. What I would be very interested to know is what prices tickets are actually going for, because league tickets are capped for price. Cup tickets are not. And this is where I think seeing the amount of empty seats that I saw at the FA Cup out of a lot of matches this last weekend makes me wonder what clubs are charging. And is it a reasonable and fair ticket price, considering the economic circumstances the country finds itself in? And it's not just a UK economic circumstance, it's a global economic circumstance. What the ticket prices are. Because we've obviously got the cap on away tickets and league play for league games. There's a cap for each level. There is no such cap for cup games, and that's home or away. So it'll be interesting to see what clubs are charging for tickets in the FA Cup. And with the fact that now, post the third round, there's no more replays, and they've eroded the replay out of the game. Clubs want to maximise their revenue at this time. So that's another subplot. But the rivalry between Cardiff and Leeds, I remember, 21 years ago at the old Ninian Park, the result there, and then the aftermath of the ugly scenes at the end of the game. Two very passionate fan bases, very passionate. But Leeds always travel well. Leeds have got a fanatical following, one of the better supported clubs in the country. I think they get overlooked by the British media when it comes to the size of Leeds fan base. And so we'll see. I wouldn't say Man City aren't looking great. They're just looking a bit more vulnerable than they used to be when it comes to Man City. I don't think they're as invincible as their record in recent years would suggest. I think, um, I mean, yeah, they've had some record-breaking seasons in there, but I'm not so sure how long Guardiola is going to be their manager. He has hinted at points that he wouldn't mind managering a managerial change for a national setup, for example, and that could be quite interesting. He's still yet to win the Champions League outside Barcelona, and he couldn't do it with Bayern either. So there are some question marks over, certain things to do with Pep Guardiola. He has spent a lot of money. He's always inherited a winning team. So it will be interesting to see what happens there. Yeah, I think Ninian, the old Ninian Park. I mean, I understand why clubs do stadium rebuilds and build new stadiums. So we'll see what happens there. The top six. I mean, look, Chelsea look really a mess this season. Spurs look a bit all over the shop as well, and there's a lot of pressure on both Graham Potter and Antonio Conte. As are they going to be one of the managers to go this season? Um, Now we're hearing speculation around Tottenham's ownership. Um, I wouldn't say Man United are in a title race just yet. I think there is still a fair gap between Manchester United and the clubs around them when it comes to off-field structure, when it comes to um, the direction where they're at. I think Man United still have a ways to go before they're at the level that they used to be. Um, while the Glazers are in charge and the structural things off the field, I think I think Man United, if they win something like the FA Cup, for example, it can be a boost. But I think Man United still have some issues off the field with club structure, with the ownership, and certain decisions that have been taken. Now, Eric Ten Hag seems to have had a little bit more freedom and a little bit more authority given to him in regards to squad selection, transfers, etc. The Ronaldo situation still says to me that there are issues off the field that need addressing. Now, whether a new ownership group coming in can fix those problems and be the solution to those issues, that's a different conversation. In in regards to being in a title race, I don't think they're quite there yet. I think there's still a fair way to go for Manchester United. Is Eric Ten Hag long term going to be the right guy to eventually win the Premier League? Um, the cricket with South Africa versus Australia. It's a bit of both. I think it's the way international cricket, the funding model works. Cricket Australia, the ECB, and the BCCI of India really control the ICC and how funding distribution models work. And South Africa are at a disadvantage in that regard. Um, I think Australia just get their selections, get their play right. I think South Africa were outclassed. I think I haven't seen I haven't watched enough cricket recently to really give a fair appraisal of the situation. South Africa will bounce back at some point. The issue that South Africa has is a lot more political, with positive discrimination for the various um, groups of South African society following the apartheid years. That I think is an issue, and it's a political issue in South Africa. But also, when it comes to the ICC and the way that the funding distribution model works, where the BCCI, which is India, get the most, and then the ECB and Cricket Australia get second and third when it comes to revenues that cricket makes. And then South Africa lead the next batch of nations. There's a big gap in revenues um, between the ECB and Cricket Australia and South African cricket, which I think is wrong how they've structured that. I think it should be an equal distribution of funds. Um, in regards to the game going forwards. South Africa has still got some cracking players. It's cricket, much like rugby union in South Africa, is a religion. Um, Cricket and rugby union in South Africa get the same kind of attention that football does here, or the NFL does in the US, in regards to viewership, fandom, player development, grassroots. The problem is money and also the politics behind it, which I think is hampering the sport rather than helping the sport. But Australia have been up and down as well. Um, Australia have been very up and down. They've had issues on and off the field in recent years. Um, I think the sport as a whole is not in a healthy place, and that is being brutally honest. I don't think the direction that cricket's been taking is in a healthy place for quite some time. But I do think Australia are in a better place than what they were a few years ago. West Indies cricket breakup, rumours it might happen, you never know. The West Indies, you've got to, bearing in mind in the Caribbean, um, you've got to get these various independent countries when it comes to international recognition together to form a multinational cricketing team, sporting team of many. They're all from a similar background, but rival countries, basically, when it comes for a variety of things. You've got players from vastly different backgrounds, from Jamaica all the way through to Guyana in South America, playing different cultural backgrounds, different societal backgrounds. So the West Indies, I'm surprised, that they're not more divided when it comes to the dressing room with Jamaicans or the Trinidadians or uh, the Barbados players, the Dominicans, the Antiguans. I'm surprised that they're on that dynamic. I don't know the result of the Manchester derby. Let's have a little look at the final result. Whether Ten Hag is the right guy to um, take United forward, win them a league title. Oh shit! What am I doing? I pressed the wrong button. Whether, as I say, whether Ten Hag is the right guy to win them a league title, time will tell. It is his first season, but look, they gave Solskjaer time. They've gone through a lot of managers since Ferguson's retirement. I still believe that there are structural issues um, behind the scenes, which, while United doing better under Ten Hag, it's taken a few missteps this season. The Ronaldo situation highlights, how much say did Ten Hag have? How much say does he have over transfers? Now, Man City, I mean, look, they've lost 2 games in a week. That doesn't happen often under Guardiola. It doesn't. And, you know, I think Arsenal and Newcastle are still better than Manchester United. I could be proven wrong at the end of the season. Injuries and loss of form may impact that. But Newcastle are in a cup semi-final. Arsenal are top of the league, and got a nice comfortable margin. And no team that's got this many wins and this many points and that big a points gap at this stage of the season has ever gone on to lose the title. So, in regards to that, I think we'll see. We'll see what happens. In regards to the West Indies, would they be any better if they had a combined international football team? No, there'd be too much division within that dressing room. You've got to remember how many different nations and territories combined to make the West Indies cricket test team. And each particular Caribbean nation, island, or has a slightly different culture and a different national. I mean, Jamaica's got a very strong national identity. Trinidad and Tobago has got a very strong national identity. And so to try and meld that together, yes, you've got this, the atmosphere that the West Indies bring, and they've developed. They've had some great players over the decades played Test cricket for the West Indies. The issue that you have is the West Indies economically doesn't have a lot of money. It's a very impoverished region in reality. It's great wealth disparity. There's a lot of corruption, which was shown up with the FIFA corruption case. And yeah, it's a different debate. Now, when it comes to football, only 3 Caribbean nations have actually ever qualified. When I was talking about Caribbean and excluding Central America, Haiti, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago have ever qualified. And that tells you something. But we'll see what happens. The issue that the West Indies Cricket Board has is money. And as I said, South Africa have the same issue. Bangladesh have the same issue. New Zealand, one of the best test sides right now, have the same issue. And it's because of the way the ICC is structured and how the funds are distributed, whereby the power is with India and India's lieutenants at the ICC are the ECB and Cricket Australia. Those 3 countries is basically a mafia. Let that sink in. It's how it works out. It's not right. There's allegations of corruption there, with who gets appointed to what position. And then you look at the West Indies and how the funding model works. It doesn't. There's a reason why the West Indies Test side is not the Test side that Brian Lara played for when he first broke onto the scene, and Curtly Ambrose when I was a kid. The last 20 years, West Indian cricket has gone downhill because there's no money in it. And it's partly because of how the funding model works, with the distribution of funds from the ICC. Afternoon, what are my thoughts on Yusufa Mukuku? Let me have a look at his name. Is it potentially? That could be very serious in regards. I've got to check who this guy actually is. I heard that there was rumours that a player did lie about his age, which would then be in breach of contractual things and youth signing policy. Let's have a look. Yeah, in that regard, then that then puts a lot of emphasis on background checks, and then bigger issues. Dortmund could be in a lot of trouble. Questions then need to be asked about again the role of player agents, because what we've seen with Chelsea and Man City is they were in breach of youth transfer policy, and they were accordingly punished. The rules are there to protect youngsters from exploitation, especially financial exploitation. The rules are there for a reason. It's a welfare, really. We have seen youngsters who are like 15, 16, obviously play first team football, make their debuts very young. I mean, Gareth Bale made his debut at the age of 16, I believe. Southampton. We've seen youngsters break through and have fantastic careers. The reason why those rules are in place is a welfare issue, for a variety of reasons. If he's lied about his age in order to skirt round signing rule, whatever the reasons may be, that will come out in the truth of time. These are apparently this, apparently that. If there is a formal investigation by the German FA and UEFA in place, that then changes the situation. But if you've got like a 22-year-old playing under 21, and there isn't a rule in place, like with the Olympics, we allowed 3 overage players, for example, that can give you a physical and advantage over the opposition because you're more physically developed. There is also a whole host of other rules in place, again, welfare regards, dealing with young people who in certain jurisdictions have a lot less legal rights than an adult when it comes to voting, driving, property ownership, various things. They're considered legal minors. So there is definitely a welfare side of things. There's also a cheating side of things. Now, if Dortmund were aware that he's fiddled his age in regards to get a contract and get round signing rules, then Dortmund are also in trouble. So there we go. Will we know better after Six Nations who is the best to do well at the Rugby World Cup? we've got 8.5 months till the Rugby Union World Cup really gets into gear. I still think France and Ireland are further ahead than the other European nations. Of course, the Southern Hemisphere nations are going to have something to say about that. Very mixed year last year in the Southern Hemisphere. Obviously, New Zealand looked human, and South Africa looked human. Australia looked human, and Argentina, I think, looked like, hey, we can do certain things we're not meant to do. So it's very open from the Southern Hemisphere perspective. On a European perspective, I think France and Ireland are further ahead. Throw them into the mix with how they've been playing over the last 12 to 18 months really makes it that there's, I think, 6 or 7 nations who are actually. I think it's going to be a more competitive World Cup than we're expecting. I think Eddie Jones getting sacked and Wayne Pivac getting sacked by their various unions changes the dynamic. Warren Gatland being reappointed as Wales coach, even though he was the reason why Wayne Pivac was selected, because he had a say on the selection of Wayne Pivac as his replacement. I'm not sure that helps Wales. I honestly don't believe that. I think Wales are. I don't know with Wales. The Wayne Pivac era was obviously impacted by COVID. I think Eddie Jones stayed on 2 years too long. I think the RFU made a mistake extending his contract twice. And Eddie Jones's relationship with the media has been poor for a very, very long time. And now in the modern professional sport, you've got to have a media relationship. Because if you piss off the media, they can write a lot of negative stories, which then adds to the pressure, so to speak. In regards to Ireland, I don't know what it is. They can't get past the quarter final. That's an issue. Right. Sacramento Republic, who my mate Dan, who is a subscriber, who I keep in regular contact with, works for. They've obviously put in an application to be another expansion team for the MLS. So how they perform in United States League, the league below, in the next season or two, in their stadium as well, getting a stadium upgrade, will go a long way to seeing if that expansion franchise license is given. So we'll see what happens there. But it just shows that the growth in the game in the US, with all these teams that no one's ever heard of before, suddenly having competitive profession. Yes, the pay grade is less, but the growth of the sport across the Atlantic in participation at all levels, grassroots, community, beer league teams, Sunday league teams, as we would call it here, community teams, kids playing the game, more fans watching the game. Yes, that growth is partly due to the European game and the World Cup and the Euros. Our international stars from Europe and South America and the TV rights for the overseas leagues. But the MLS has grown as well. And there are more teams applying to join the MLS league system. So we'll see how that plays out. But Dan, who's a moderator on the channel, I think he'll probably be asleep right now because he's on the West Coast, so he's 8 hours behind. So he'll probably be sleeping away because it's like 4 o'clock in the morning there. Whatever time in the morning. It is interesting though that the MLS is still growing. Obviously, the MLS has had its issues over the years, and there are several key turning points that, along the way, means the MLS is now where it is. David Beckham is a key component in that turning point. David Beckham doesn't sign for LA Galaxy. Where we go. The Andrew Tate situation, I'm not getting drawn into that because that's more of a political situation and a criminal situation. Speculation is highly dangerous. Look, he's a slimy character. That's my personal view on him. But it's not a sporting related question because he's no longer a kickboxer. He's a sleazy businessman who's left the UK to bugger off overseas. He's been caught overseas. He's been involved in a long-term investigation, got nothing to do with Greta Thunberg. The fact that he just got into an online spat with her, mate, was hilarious and got schooled by an autistic teenager, which was just fantastic. Fantastic. I'm not a fan of Greta Thunberg either, but that was fantastic. But he's a sleazy character. And while he was a great kickboxer, he's not a great role model for young men. He's not a great role model for anyone, really. The businesses he owns, I've got nothing against the adult industry or gambling industry per se, but him as a person and some of his views I find quite vile, and what he's been, investigated for are very serious charges. And until those investigations are complete, he's obviously in deep shit, quite honestly. And I've got to be careful with the language now because YouTube are cracking down on swearing. So when you hear me swear, it proves that I'm pissed off. He's not a particularly nice individual, Andrew Tate. Neither is his brother. I nearly got involved with a spat with one of his brothers on Twitter earlier, and I was gonna I just thought better of it because reasons. But I was actually really surprised that a high-profile rugby league player in this country, in the UK, follows him on social media. A player that I held in high regard until I saw that, because he's a player from a minority background who no longer plays internationally. He's one of my favourite players. But then I'm not going to name the player because that's not fair. But I was stunned that this particular player that I held in very high regard is a follower of the Tate brothers on social media, considering their views on women and certain views on certain things in society, including domestic violence, and their views on the position of women in society. I was quite stunned by, but doesn't I'm not surprised by. Let's just say that a rugby league player, forget who it is, would actually share similar views. I'm surprised by the individual who may not agree with everything that Andrew and his brother say, but I was a bit disheartened by the individual player who is following their social media accounts. Very disheartened. It says to me that some of the issues we've seen in rugby league and rugby union, and in fact most professional sport, like the Mason Greenwood situation and the Benjamin Mendy situation, where there's going to be a retrial on those other two counts where the jury demurred. So Mendy is still not out of the woods yet legally, although I think his career is done. Mason Greenwood, a trial date's been set. I think his career is done as well. I think they're going to be too toxic to touch. Too toxic to touch. I mean, look, Ched Evans resumed his career. Other players didn't. I do think Benjamin Mendy's career is done. I can't see another club willing to get involved with Mendy. And the fact he's still got two charges outstanding says all you need to we need to know. The fact that the jury went with not guilty on, I think, 6 out of the 8 charges he was facing is interesting. But Man City haven't been paying his wages since he's been on remand, and whether his contract's been fully terminated or they've decided not to support him financially, we'll see what happens. But it does highlight an issue, I think, not only at Man City within that dressing room, because he's not the only player to have had questionable activity over the last couple of years in his attitudes towards women, the COVID lockdown, law and order in general. I mean, Carl Walker springs to mind with some of his antics over the last 3 years. I mean, they don't look like good role models for young men or young women, for that matter, or just young people in general. So when you've got people like Andrew Tate, who is a scummy individual, in my personal opinion, don't like him. And when you've got high-profile players like Carl Walker, and in this case Mendy, in trouble for various reasons, and in Mendy's case, being on remand for the best part of a year and facing some very serious charges, very similar to what Andrew Tate's facing now. Whether they're found guilty or not is irrelevant. The fact they've got to that stage says to me that the prosecutor's office, in this case the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service here in the UK, but in Romania it's going to be the Chief Prosecutor's Office in Romania. And then we look across the Atlantic and look at the allegations against NFL players like Ben Roethlisberger, for example. And then you look what happened to Michael Vick with the dog fighting ring and things like that. These are high-profile athletes. It's a privilege, not a right. And then you read about some of the court transcripts about how these players don't do anything for themselves. They have chauffeurs. They have professional cooks. There's a club representative who deals with their every whim. Then you have to look at the role of their agent or agents. They're hanging, and it's just like these guys don't live in the real world. They don't live in the real world. It stuns me how out of touch with reality. The higher you know, these big name players, and how out of touch with reality they live. And then you listen to like some of the court transcripts and how they treat other people, be it women or people of lesser background, when they live this playboy, carefree lifestyle. It's ridiculous. And then I look at other sports where the salaries are less. They're still getting paid big money, and they seem a little bit more down to earth. Which is why I'm a big fan of like rugby league and ice hockey. The sports they play, the brutality they go through. Um, and then you find out how little some of these players are getting paid. You're thinking, okay, then they're not much different from your average um, working man. Yeah, I don't know what happened to Gylfi Sigurdsson in the end. I don't know what happened to him. I don't think any charges were brought, but his career's done. And that again highlights a cultural issue within the sport. How you know high-profile athletes treat the wider how they live. Um, Gylfi, he hasn't played for over a year, but as far as I can tell, no charges have been brought against him. Now, whether Everton are still on contract and they're paying his wages, or they've terminated his contract, again, that is not clear. What is clear is Everton have got a serious problem, and they've got money issues. They're constrained by financial fair play. The manager's under pressure, and the club is staring down the barrel of relegation. Um, but I then look at some of the domestic violence complaints against high-profile athletes, and I look at some of the other legal issues that athletes are facing, whether it be drug charges, drink driving, assault allegations. Um, you know, there's that ex-Premier League player who's been jailed for a fraud scheme. Who's played for Charlton. There's been another player who was arrested in Dublin on a drugs charge with a significant amount of Class A drugs in his vehicle after a car chase. There are question marks about how these players, during their careers and just after, are advised, and the culture within professional sport. Um, it does trouble me significantly. And when you've got what we hear about the Mendy situation, with how basically there's a club representative who deals with everything from chef to dealing with whatever, and they don't live in the real world. And yes, because they're very high profile, and what we saw with Harry Maguire at Man United last season with the bomb threat against him, they can be also quite vulnerable. They've got security. I couldn't live like that. I couldn't live like that. I'm kind of glad I'm not a professional athlete, to be fair, because I couldn't live with security and bodyguard. I just couldn't live like that. Do my nuts. Um, but again, these allegations that keep cropping up about how their attitude as well, they're entitled. As I say, it's a privilege, not a right to be. No one's entitled to be a professional athlete. It is a privilege, not a right. Um, the Payne Haas situation is not his fault, but the situation there, I mean, it's well known in the Australian media that there's a family issues um, in regards to Payne Haas and his background. And because he's from a minority background where in the Aboriginal community there's a big drink and drug problem in Australia, which is, again, partly the government's fault, and how there is sort of like an issue within that community, within the wider social construct. It's a very deprived community. There is a domestic violence issue. There's a drink and drug issue. There's a higher rate of incarceration, very similar to the US, actually, to be fair, which is really saddening. If you think about it. the Payne Hart situation, I think there is a culture issue at Brisbane. I don't, and it, there are several players who've had some misbehaviour and issues in the off season. So we'll see. In regards, what am I going to do when I hit 1,000 subs? Shave all the hair off. Yeah, Richard Rufus. I remember watching him play. He's been sentenced for a fraud scheme he was involved in. So white collar crime, as we call it. But it's still troubling that high level player, not a superstar player, but he's played at the highest level. He's earned a decent salary over his lifetime. It makes you wonder how he was advised to invest his money. Like, these players are paid in a week what some people take a decade to earn. Some of the wages, I mean, this is the criticism of Gareth Bale. He was one of the top paid players of all time. My entire working lifetime, I wouldn't have earned what he earned in a week. Yeah, Goodison Park, only a few years left of Goodison Park before it's demolished. And that's been a bone of contention in the city of Liverpool. It's had political ramifications in regards to the stadium, the location of the new stadium, the loss of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the corruption allegations against local politicians and local council, which has led to arrests and an investigation by the Serious Fraud Office, and Merseyside and City of London Police, which is where the fraud squad's based. Yeah, the burglary side of things, it's not a new thing. I remember about a decade ago there was a spate where Liverpool, Manchester United, and Everton players were targeted predominantly, although other players were also targeted as well. Um, and look, whilst I'm not a fan of how much they get paid, I understand their careers can be short. Injury or ill health can definitely shorten a career. At the top end, they are overpaid. There is a wage imbalance. It's a top-heavy structure of wages, and it's a false economy, as I say. The wage inflation and the transfer fee inflation is out of control. But that just means that says to me that they've got damn good agents who get them a good financial compensation for their services, and the clubs are dumb enough to keep paying it until high-profile big clubs make a stand on wage demands, which they're not going to do, but someone might. I think Man United have capped wages now per week. Since Ronaldo's gone, any new signing now, you're capped at this per week. So Eric Ten Hag has brought in a wage cap internally at the club, but there's not an official salary cap. United have got their own little salary cap. Until more clubs say we're not going to pay above this amount per week or per season or per year, players are going to get away with getting paid as much as they bloody want. Is it unfair that they get then targeted by burglars and thieves? Look what happened with Mesut Ozil in the middle of the street in London with his teammate, Kalinic, I believe it was, Karadzic, where they were held up at knife point and then, robbed or attempted to be robbed at knife point. Look, it happens. Not every player is going to be blinged up to the eyeballs. A lot of players, ironically, while they're well paid, they invest their money. They don't actually have big flashy properties and big flashy cars and live the flashy lifestyle. The ones that do are in the media. They become well known in the media. Word spreads around this guy has a lot of cash, like Danny Rose complaining about how he can't survive on 50 grand a week. What is he spending his money on? And then you get those players that demand more and more money, or like Kyle Walker, party hard and post it over social media, for example. That becomes well known. Benjamin Mendy fell down that path, and obviously he's ended up in a situation with his legal troubles, which yeah, he's been paid a lot of money, but B, he's got the wrong people around him who got him in a situation that, had he been a little bit more humble and just kept close with his childhood friends and family, he may not have ended up in that situation. Well, I think we're seeing more pressure for UEFA as a whole and the sport as a whole to bring in salary cap. Because look what's happened with this European Super League. All the clubs, apart from one, who signed up for the European Super League at that time and made a loss the previous year. One club hadn't disclosed their profit or loss margin, which was Liverpool. The only club involved with the European Super League that actually made a profit in the calendar year beforehand was Chelsea, and that's because they had a transfer embargo and they hadn't sacked a manager for a while. There's your irony behind it. Every club involved with the European Super League had racked up massive operating losses and debts. So I think a salary cap and a transfer cap is going to be coming, and changes to the financial structures. I mean, look, we're having these new spending rules brought in a couple of years' time, so they're going to have to act quick. They'll have to grandfather contracts, and I think players are going to have to realise the golden era of indefinite, infinite wages is coming to an end. Now, what they level that cap out is going to be interesting. Yes, the MLS does have a salary cap system. The NHL, the NFL, the NRL and AFL in Australia, and we can debate whether their system works effectively or not because it's designed to actually have a draft system in the NRL, and the AFL has that, and we can argue the effectiveness of that and why teams continue to try and bend and get round, and is the enforcement of it correct, and is it a strong enough system? The only major sports league outside of Europe that doesn't really have a salary cap is Major League Baseball, and that is in crisis. The Adrian Mutu situation, unfair treatment, he made an error. No, he made that error multiple times. Again, lived the Playboy lifestyle, caught with illicit recreational drugs in the system multiple times. That's not a mistake. That's stupidity, in my personal opinion. And he wasted his career. That's my personal opinion on that one. Adrian Mutu, no sympathy. I have sympathy for addicts, and I have sympathy in the sense that recreational drug use, in my opinion, should be legalised, and we can have that debate, as I keep saying on the other channel. But when it comes to a sporting context, if that is on the WADA code, World Anti-Doping Agency code, saying that this recreational substance is actually banned, don't take it. Simple. He decided to take cocaine more than once and get caught more than once. No sympathy. None. Sorry. Same with Maradona. Fantastically skilled player. There is no doubt on that. But lived a Playboy lifestyle. And yeah, addiction is a cruel thing. And I have sympathy with addicts. And I honestly do. But when you're in that position where you're in a very high profile position where the help is actually available, and there are processes in place, and you keep getting caught, and you are an addict, then yes, you do deserve the support because your industry has those procedures in place. If you continue to flout them or not stick to the path, then you have no sympathy from it. Because yes, addiction is hard to break. The cycle is horrible. But if you have decided and listened to the advice and go, look, we can give you support, we're going to help, and you keep going back into that cycle, then yeah, it's a hard cycle. But when you're in that position, when mainstream society is harder, there is a stigma. If you can be that high profile person to break the stigma and be good for tens of thousands of people, and you choose not to, then as a person you are a bit of a div. So no sympathy for Adrian Mutu. Sometimes tough love's the best. Napoli to win Serie A. Looks like it could be a thing. FIFA breakaway countries leaving FIFA. Is it possible? There is a breakdown in the relationship between UEFA and CONMEBOL and FIFA. I think the Club World Cup is going to be an issue, considering that UEFA have now been forced to have ask countries to look at their domestic cup and league competitions and make changes, which is why I think the FA Cup replay disappears. I think the League Cup changes. The two-leg semi-final, I think, disappears. There's definitely a breakdown in the relationship between the two biggest partners in FIFA, which is CONMEBOL, UEFA, and FIFA itself. I think the direction FIFA is trying to take the game and the way they're going about it, and also domestically, regionally with UEFA, with the European Super League, and how they're trying to run the game and the legal side of things getting involved. The governance side of football is a mess, really is, and some of the things coming out of Infantino's mouth don't sit well with fans, and so FIFA's at a crossroads. But we've seen this before. I mean, look, the IOC has had its own issues. We've seen the breakdown of relationship between the NHL, IIHF, and the IOC in regards to NHL players not being allowed to go to the Olympics. They suddenly go, yeah, we'll let you go to the Olympics, then COVID impacts that. So the various stakeholders, there is a definite crossroads here. I don't think FIFA has helped themselves with the massive corruption scandal, but that flows down to CONMEBOL and UEFA and the other regional governing bodies, and then at a national level with the FAs in regards to corruption and bribery and fraud and the various things. So football governance is a mess, but sports governance in general, I think, could be a lot better and a lot more transparent. There is clearly a lack of transparency. I think Infantino's got to go. If any potential breakdown of FIFA is going to happen, he will still be in charge if it happens. I think there is definitely a poor relationship between Infantino and the stakeholders. Some of the statements that have been made make me just go, have we got a cyborg in charge? Is this a deliberate ploy to deliberately make it look that bad? I mean, as I said, the Qatar World Cup wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It was sort of in the middle for me personally. I felt it was entertaining. It was decent. It wasn't the best. It wasn't the worst. But the way how we got to Qatar 2022 and the process behind the previous 12 years leaves a lot to be desired. And unfortunately, I think future World Cups, I think there's still that stigma of corruption that hasn't been cleared. And uh, I wouldn't say it wasn't the best. I think it went better than a lot of people thought it would. There were still a lot of issues that went underreported deliberately. When people did try and highlight the problems, they were shut down by the organising side of things. There were issues that I think, for me, it ranks in the middle for a whole host of things. Now, yes, there was no real crowd trouble. There was a few incidents, but European fans were generally well behaved. The Mexican and Argentinian fans weren't. Uh, in in regards to the quality of matches, we definitely saw a drop in goals per game at various points in the tournament. We saw more goalless draws than the previous World Cup. There's only one goalless game. There was, I think, nearly double figures this World Cup. More penalties were saved at this World Cup. There were some interesting stats to come out of it. I think the problems with this World Cup was the previous 12-year build-up, the controversy surrounding how they. For me, it was one of them where it wasn't terrible. It wasn't USA '94 levels of I'm going to gouge my eyes out, and it wasn't 2010 South Africa. Or have we really? I mean, yeah, South Africa's got a sport pedigree, which is fantastic, and it has got a footballing pedigree historically that people forget about. The African Cup of Nations '94, post apartheid, but the quality of matches wasn't great. I'm not saying South Africa was a bad host. No. Culturally, South Africa's a fantastic country, got all these diverse backgrounds, multiple languages, multiple ethnic backgrounds, very diverse cities. Crime rate's dangerously high, but South Africa for you. But South Africa's a sporting nation, is sport mad. Qatar has no sporting history until the last decade. South Africa's had a sporting history going back pre-apartheid, and it's a very interesting country, and has hosted big cricket, rugby union before, African Nations before. Um, has had some great international athletes, great Olympians, great world champions, some great individual players. But the quality of football we saw wasn't great. The Vuvuzelas, I know the South African fans were boisterous and energetic, but the Vuvuzela, I mean, that's one thing I don't miss. When it comes to the 2026 World Cup, the group stage format for me concerns me. I think FIFA will be forced to make changes to that format. Personally, obviously qualification hasn't even begun yet for I don't believe for the next World Cup, because we've got the Gold Cup, we've got Copa America, African Cup of Nations, the Euros. But I think the format for the next World Cup group stages is chronically flawed. As we're going back to 1982 levels of West Germany, Austria, we can just fix matches here. And considering what FIFA's gone through over the last however long, and the amount of match fixing scandals we've seen in the sport in the last 20 years, they're going to want to change that format before a lot of eyebrows are raised going, how fixed is this tournament? Really? Seriously? Questions will be asked. Thoughts on Man United? They're doing better than I expected they would this season, but they're still actually a ways off. But what I find interesting with their history against Man City, they're going to lose the next game, but their record is better against Man City than some of their other rivals like Liverpool. I think Newcastle have actually got a decent record against them historically. Arsenal, when they're going to play Arsenal, Newcastle, and Liverpool, I think they're going to lose. And I also think they're going to lose the next league game, because that generally happens after they beat Man City. But since the Fergie era, their record against Man City, their performance. So we will see. They up their level of performance, but then the following week or two, their performance drops off. And so we'll see what happens. We'll see what the next couple of games are like. But even with Solskjaer, Van Gaal, Mourinho, with the issues they've had, you know, their record recently against Man City has been quite decent, considering. Been. Yeah, I think the format of the World Cup, 48 teams. I'm not against expansion. I think 32 was the right number. I understand why, because they want to keep growing the game at all levels, which is fine. But I think FIFA, we'll see. We'll see if the infrastructure holds up, which is everything from stadiums, transport, accommodation, fan zones, economics as well. But we'll see what happens. Man United, look, we're halfway through the season. The transfer window is still open. I think the result against Everton in the FA Cup is a false narrative because of how bad Everton are. And they were lucky in that game as well, in my opinion, to get a 3-1. Man City, they up their game, their local rivals. I think when they play Newcastle and Arsenal and some of the other teams in the league, they're going to come back down to earth. That's my personal opinion. But they could exceed expectations. I think they are playing better than the squad would suggest. I think removing Ronaldo from that dressing room has helped. Now, whether that's a long-term benefit or just a short-term one, we got rid of that guy. We'll see how the rest of the season plays out. Why have Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn so controversial? Because they chase money over integrity. They're true capitalists in the worst sense. The Hearns and Frank Warren, to me, I think the Hearns are worse than Frank Warren personally. Look what's happening with snooker right now. That is a Hearn sphere of operations with the match fixing allegations. As I've said, I've never been a fan of the Hearns or Frank Warren. I can tolerate Frank Warren a bit more than Barry and Eddie Hearn, and that's just how it is. But wherever the Hearns go, corruption and sleaze follows. Snooker's finding that out in the last 5-6 years. Snooker's finding that out, and it's the issues surrounding snooker are going to become so damaging that if more players fall to this corruption probe and get implicated, that is massive reputational damage to a sport that has seen massive growth in the last 15 years, which is a good thing. However, with rapid growth issues like this will occur. And unfortunately, I haven't heard the Hearns come out and give a statement saying corruption's wrong. We got to root it out. I haven't heard them as basic people behind the change in world snooker, behind snooker's resurgence. I haven't heard Eddie or Barry Hearn come out and give a statement saying we are deeply concerned about the allegations against players on the world tour. We haven't. They have not come out and stated we have concerns. We want to clean up the sport. We want to clean up the side that side of it. So, in my opinion, and I know I'm putting two and two together. Corruption, dodginess, backhanders. I don't know. It seems too coincidental that every sport the Hearns are involved in, apart from angling, fishing, corruption follows. And look what happened with the Ben Eubank fight and the undercard. One of my, well, I do his bins, lives up the road from me, Felix Cash, was on the undercard. Those fights haven't been rearranged for those boxers who were on the undercard for the Ben Eubank fight. And it was the Hearn camp that were at fault. I know they can't take criticism, and I'm being very critical of the sports they're involved in and the sleaze that's around it. Darts, we've seen multiple darts players done for various sleazy activities. Darts, you could argue, is a very working class piss head sport, but that's another thing. The sleaze aspect and special snooker, the corruption aspect, is deeply troubling. I have not had anything. Look, when the Eubank Ben fight was cancelled, there wasn't really a press conference saying, anything. They buggered off out the building as quick as they could before the angry lynch mob that formed outside. There were fans who were obviously went get tickets to press conferences as well. You don't have to be in the media. You can get tickets to get, on the signing benches. You can pay to get your autograph. You can pay to meet the fighters. You can pay to meet, the high profile athletes that are being promoted at a press conference, because they'll do fan signing things. They will do guided tours of, let's say, the stadium or the arena or whatever it may be. And what I find interesting is well, we made our money, we're successful. You might be successful, but it's how you make that successful. I would not be surprised if there's going to be at some point a corruption probe into if we have a change of government, because I believe the Hearns are Conservative Party donors. Let's say we've got a Liberal Democrat or Labour government or a coalition government of those two political parties. I would not be surprised if there's an anti-corruption probe into the Hearns business dealings. Again, that's a video. For me, I can criticise. Now, I don't have concrete proof that they're dodgy, but they come across as wannabe East End gangsters. And I've got friends from London, all over London, and I know some people who know some people, ironically. You're never more than 2-3 steps away from organised crime. You are literally never more than 2 or 3 steps away from having a friend who has a friend who is related or knows that criminal. You're never more than 2-3 steps away. So there's a 1 in 4 chance you're going to come across a crook at some point. The Hearns to me are like that person who your friend knows a friend of individual. They come across as much like Sullivan and Gold. I know, obviously, David Gold has passed away, which is sad. It's his sudden passing. But they were known as the Dildo Brothers, and they got done on obscenity charges. Back in the day, you had very strict laws surrounding adult material and licensing and censorship, and they were in breach of that, and they served time for obscenity. Now, I have friends who work in the adult industry, and they were known as the Dildo Brothers. Okay, and I got asked to do a video on my thoughts on David Gold, the Dildo Brothers, sleaze merchants. If you want to go on the stiff British upper lip game, we don't talk about that. It's naughty. No, sleaze brothers. Now, I'm not against the adult industry. I've got friends who work in the adult industry. But they were known as the Dildo Brothers, and one of them is gone. And they were also one of those, we're linked to dodginess. There was always that rumour around Sullivan and Gold about some of their business dealings. Legitimate business dealings, still. Yeah. The Oystons at Blackpool. Obviously, one of them did go to prison, but again, sleaze. There are certain ownership groups and certain investors that you go, actually, do we really want this individuals involved with my sports team, my sports league, my sport? And unfortunately, no snooker players have come out and criticised the Hearns because the Hearns technically are paying their wages with the prize money and the tournaments. Not one single current or ex-player has gone, I don't like where the direction the Hearns are taking my sport, which is damning. Absolutely damning. No one in the media is brave enough to do it. No one in the player base is brave enough to do it. And not enough fans are brave enough to do it, which is why they get away with what they do, if it is so proven. Now, I'm theorising, and that's my personal opinion. Now, Barry and Eddie Hearn can sit on a table opposite me, and I can say, look, you've done some good for snooker, absolutely. But with these corruption allegations, what are you going to say on it? What's your stand on it? And they haven't come out and said, in strong enough terms, that, hey, this is an issue within the sport that we promote. This is an issue within the sport that we heavily invest in. They made a lot of money out of it, but they've invested a lot of money in capital into it. Yet, because of their involvement with another sport, darts, that I used to be passionate about, that's, to me, dead to me. Snooker's going the same way because it is not tackling the issues of corruption and match fixing and backhanders and spot fixing within. Like, I'll lose a frame, or I'll deliberately not get a. I'll get a 1-4. I'll get a 140 instead of a 147 for betting purposes. Stuart Bingham being an idiot, getting a 6-month ban is Stuart Bingham. Stephen Lee getting a 10-year, which is basically a lifetime ban. Come on, lads, wake and smell the music. And yeah, I'm losing interest in football because of all the corruption scandals, and it's not just FIFA. It's the match fixing scandals. It's the individual clubs getting done for dodgy dealings. It's like the integrity of the sport that I love is a question, and unfortunately, the governing body and the domestic national level aren't doing enough. Yes, I would argue that it is the last couple of months or the last few 3-4 years has highlighted salary ceiling or a wage cap in place, yes. And also a minimum wage as well for players, because some of these young players are getting screwed, or some of these fringe players are getting buggered. But there is a massive wage imbalance. And when you've got professional clubs, admittedly lower down the football, like League One, League Two, going, hang on a sec, guys, we need a spending or a salary cap in place, otherwise we're going to go out of business. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. I do think the COVID pandemic, the sporting shutdown, the statements that were given beforehand, 2 or 3 years before, saying, "Oh, we can let fans in for nothing," or very tenor. Turns out they were lying and cooking the books. Come on, come on. Masters. What we're talking about golf. I know some of the golf is on BBC, but not all 4 days. And I can't remember if it's Sky or BT or DAZN or whatever broadcaster it is, but golf is another sport that's gone to the win for me. The internal battles with it. Oh, snooker. I believe it's BBC. It always is BBC. It'll definitely on the iPlayer. If not BBC, it'll be ITV. But I believe it's BBC for the Masters. I think that's one of the grade A sporting events that's never done. Golf. Should there be a law put into place in the US when it comes to Saudi buying up stuff like golf and WWE? They're trying to put it into place with Microsoft and Activision. So what's the difference? There's nothing wrong with having investment. Globalization. It's global economy, global supply chains. Nothing wrong with investment and investment portfolio. Even communist countries like China, Vietnam rely on overseas investment, and vice versa, and investing in China is actually heavily dependent on its investment portfolio for overseas income outside of trade. Investing in private firms, heavily desperate. If we're discussing sport, look, Vince McMahon's come back into the WWE fold. His daughter's walked away from her position, which is troubling, considering there's been allegations against Vince McMahon. But that's entertainment. That belongs on the other channel. I know some of the wrestlers in WWE and other wrestling promotions have been mixed martial artists or kickboxers or pro athletes in, let's say American football and things like that. but it's sports entertainment, hence the entertainment side. If I was to do a WWE video, it would be on the other channel. But wrestling, again, much like other forms of entertainment and sport, is dead to me now. It has been for a long time. There was inappropriate things, I believe. I believe there was what is it? I read an article somewhere. There were allegations against him for misconduct. Now, what those misconduct allegations were, I don't know. So there is that. But no, wrestling for me is something that I don't follow anymore. I've got friends who do, and if you were to follow me on social media, on my personal social media, which is nothing to do with the channel, I do put wrestling memes up on my Facebook and on my Instagram, and I share Instagram reels and stuff. So there you go. No, I look. They want to take WWE to Saudi Arabia more often, pay per views. But what does that leave for the women wrestlers and commentators as well? Considering the laws surrounding women in just Arabia in general and that part of the world. But look what's happening in Iran right now. Saudi Arabia and the US have had a mixed relationship since 1945 on a variety of issues. All the Middle Eastern economies are wanting to diversify their economic base, which is fair. They have to. I think the only Middle Eastern economy that I can think of that hasn't really done anything is Oman, which is a bit less conservative than its neighbours, and is a little bit more diverse with its economic base anyway. Slightly poorer, but it's a bit more economically diverse with being a port of entry, a trading kind of economy, and seems to be a little bit less involved in the sporting aspect of, oh, look, come and have your boxing here or your darts or your snooker. Oman's a little bit more moderate in a lot of things. But the UAE, so Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they've gone mad for this, buying into every sport they can, investing in every sport they can, diversifying their economies, because Oman already has that diversified economy to a certain extent. It's a bit mad. Yemen's in a state of blowing itself to pieces with Saudi involvement and Iranian involvement. Ironically, that's a proxy war. Jordan's hosting what seems to be half Syria right now, and Kuwait is just being Kuwait. So Kuwait and Oman are doing nothing to. I'm going to buy a football club today. I'm going to buy this today. They're being very, very bit more restrained in their diversification of their economy. In a sense that they're not buying into the craziness of the so-called sports washing. And they've also been a bit more restrained in the construction side of it. But that's again a wider topic for the other channel. In regards to Dana White and the allegations of violence being leveled against him, his wife battered him back. And look, yeah, he has been in hot water. Domestic violence, be it against a woman or a man, is wrong. We've seen a definite, and then you go back to the Andrew Tate kind of thing where he sort of condones, if your wife speaks out, your girlfriend speaks out to her, give her a backhand. I've unfortunately had to work with some people who have those kind of views that the women belong in the kitchen, and if she speaks out to her, give her a black eye, that kind of thing, and espouse those views. Unfortunately, I've worked with some of these types, which is just how life is. But Dana White, high-profile figure, he comes across as a bit of a moron, to be brutally honest. I'm not a big fan of Dana White. I'm not a fan of look, I don't look. I've got friends who participate in MMA and train and the mixed martial artists and all that. And I've done a bit of martial arts in my time, partly just for keep fit and sparring with my mates who are more seriously into it. They were using me as sort of a crash test dummy, I suppose, if you want to discuss that. But I've got mates who've done martial arts and mixed martial arts. I've got a mate who runs a mixed martial arts gym that also covers boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, Wing Chun, all the martial arts you can think of, MMA. The UFC promotion, while it's the biggest, has the most controversy surrounding it. It's not just the Conor McGregor antics, it's the antics of other fighters as well who are less high profile, who misbehave in very public places. Um, and Dana White's come out with some really. Dana White is one of those individuals who's a Trump supporter, for one, which says a lot about his personal character. And he doesn't come across as a particularly likable individual. It's not to say he's not successful, but he doesn't come across as a particularly likable individual. Unfortunately, the UFC as a brand has become big, especially with young men, and much like Andrew Tate, Dana White, and has become basically a social media influencer by accident. A lot of people take his word um, as gospel. And unfortunately, hitting your wife in public, yes, she hit him back, which fair play to her, but also at the same time, how violent is their relationship behind closed doors? We don't know. But domestic violence should not be, you know, put on, is not acceptable. And I've had friends who've had to go through it. It's not pleasant. He's in a very privileged position being where he is. But the UFC as a promotion, well, I'm not against MMA. I think the UFC promotion has put me off mixed martial arts. And yeah, the sport itself has seen an explosion of growth, especially in Eastern Europe and North America. There's been a massive explosion in growth. But there's also been a lot of unsavoury incidents within the promotion. Conor McGregor being, one of those individuals, but not the only individual. There's been others, and there's been some quite unsightly scenes, which don't. Martial arts. I was always taught martial arts bring discipline and respect, and I've seen a lot of ill discipline and lack of respect by people like Conor McGregor and Dana White and others who are less high profile. Within Ronda Rousey comes across as quite a respectful character. I like Ronda Rousey. Um, now she's gone into pro wrestling, but I do like Ronda Rousey, and she's one of the better examples coming out of the UFC. Admittedly, the women's division, but one of the better examples. But overall, there's a lot of negative, controversial headlines create interest, and I think that's also part of um, the growth of it is controversy sells. It does. The Attitude Era for me as well. Again, um, is interesting. Yeah, there is a lot of bad promotion side of it. There is a lot of issues with um, wrestling. Look, Eddie Guerrero was my favorite wrestler. I used to have the same haircut as Eddie Guerrero. Latino he except I couldn't really grow the. I tended to grow the facial hair as a better description of my little wispy little mustache and little goatee that I had when I was a teenager. But Eddie Guerrero was a big blow to a young, impressionable kid, though I was. Chris Benoit, my friend Nikki was a massive Chris Benoit fan, and and her then partner was an independent wrestler. He's also a good friend. I've got a few friends who are on the indie circuit here in the UK in pro wrestling, and the Benoit situation was a hammer blow to all of us. I got into TNA for a little while, but my enjoyment of pro wrestling wasn't there the same. The way it was handled was bad, and then obviously you find out about obviously delving into the '94 steroids trial that McMahon went through in '94, which was a federal trial in the US, and then you delve into and you look at these pro wrestlers, be it they're retired or still alive, dying young. When I say dying younger than the average age of the country of origin, predominantly in their 30s to 50s, is quite worrying as well. So the welfare of the athletes, I do call them athletes because I've helped put together a wrestling ring, and I can tell you now, I've been choke slammed onto one of them. Yes, I've helped my mate. I'm going to do this move. Do you mind being like a sparring? You okay? You can throw me around a little bit. I can tell you now, it hurts a lot. Um, but at the end of the day, you know, there's been a lot of controversy. Oh, I forget who the female wrestler was who's now doing pornography. And it is in China because she's passed away. And and she was also a WWE wrestler, and they suspended her and threatened to tear up her contract. Not because she was doing adult material, it's because she was doing a secondary job that was in breach of her contract. And that's become a bit of a talking point. Yeah, Joe Rogan and Dana White, they're showing signs of CTE, that's my opinion. Um, Greg Berhalter, yes, that's come up as well about obviously what happened in '91. That's 31 years ago. But anyone who beats women or vice versa, woman beating a man, automatically is my respect. It's a domestic violence situation. But when you are having to go back in time to dig up stuff, attitudes and cultures have changed in regards to domestic violence, and that is ridiculous. Ronda Rousey was great at first when she went to WWE, but look. Firstly, she has had a kid in that time, so she's a full-time mum as well as a wrestler, and in my opinion, I think she's still. I think that's then down to behind the scenes management screwing it up. Her physical attributes, but she's been a wrestling fan since she was like tiny, since she was a kid. It, she even stated while she was still in UFC and MMA in general that it was a lifelong dream just to have a 1 year contract, just to do it, just in one live show or one pay per view or whatever it was, just to do it once, just to have one appearance. It doesn't matter if it's WWE or just any pro wrestling promotion. So for someone like that, that's a big thing. Yeah, you could argue that the again, someone who hasn't followed WWE for nearly 20 years, like 15 years. Um, I haven't followed wrestling for about a decade, so this is all to me like main event, this and that. But there's been so many scandals that have become so everyday news when it comes to wrestling fans. Like, oh, another wrestler has been done for steroids or breaching the wellness program, like or dying. It's just okay, okay. Um, oh look, China because she did adult content. It's irrelevant. It was all legal what she did. Um, um, look, I feel sorry for her. I mean, she did have an addiction issue, and she wasn't supported post wrestling. Now she went down the adult industry path, but she did it totally legally. Um, and that was her choice, and that's fine. But she was mistreated. A lot of them were in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. There was a lot of steroids around. There was a lot of recreational drug use. And then when CM Punk was talking about his staph infection when he was in the promotion, how they treated injuries and dealt with medical issues and health problems and personal issues. No, Vince McMahon and the industry as a whole has failed so many performers. It's ridiculous, and it's not just wrestling. It's a lot of professional sports have failed their athletes and their coaches, and we can talk about every sport. Um, um, CM Punk. I can't. I mean, look. I don't agree with how he's gone about. CM Punk went about airing his issues, but I agree with what he was saying. Yeah. And look, the McMahon family. I think Shane McMahon is a little bit more clued up than his dad, and he's sort of walked away. But the McMahons, very similar to the Hearns, can't take criticism. Um, and then I look at the direction pro wrestling's taken. I look at the direction professional sports taken in various sports. I'm a bit concerned about a lot of things. And athlete welfare, I keep bringing it up on a regular basis. People aren't interested. They don't care. They don't care until after the athlete's retired and he's died or she's died. Oh, we could have done more. But the issues were there when they were a professional athlete or a professional wrestler, and no one cared because they were entertaining us or not entertaining us, or they were controversial. And then you actually find out what's actually going on. It's like, oh, we should do more for mental health, or we should do more for athlete welfare when it comes to head injuries or injury rehabilitation or addiction support. At which point, the athlete in question has either got serious health problems, he's dead. So when I discuss issues like Maradona had, Paul Gascoigne, and we're discussing like Tony Adams or whatever players, I get one idiot going, "Oh, that was 20, 30 years ago. Who cares?" Well, one's basically buggered health wise, one's dead, and one keeps relapsing. Uh, one is still in the public eye, Paul Merson. He's still involved with the media. So there we go. And the same goes for wrestling. We're talking about like Eddie Guerrero. He's dead. Heart disease brought on by decades of drug and steroid abuse. Chris Benoit, dead. CTE, murder suicide. Undertaker, he had injury concerns. Stone Cold broke his neck. His knees were buggered. The Rock, he's had a great acting career, but he still has injury problems. Triple H, didn't he shatter his leg once? Rikishi, I think is Rikishi dead now, or he's had some health issues. The Hardy brothers both have had substance abuse issues. I still love playing the video games. Don't get me wrong, but I look at those wrestlers listed. Was it Christian or Edge who broke his neck? Yeah. So and it was definitely Scotty 2 Hotty and Grandmaster Sexy. One of them's died. Oh my God, he's doing the worm. So the Attitude Era, when either these guys were in their early 20s or were breaking through, you look at them, two of them are dead, and multiples. Scott Steiner, God, the steroids and that man. The joke I have whenever there's a wrestling meme on the internet involving, Ultimate Warrior or Randy Savage, I always make the joke that, sir, your test results have come back. You found traces of steroids in your cocaine stream because they were regular. The steroid era, as I call it, went straight through the Attitude Era all the way to present day from the 80s. And it's very noticeable that in more recent times there's been that drop in steroid use, but there's still the wellness program still keeps creeping up. And then you've got the recreational drug use, which is well known throughout the industry. Many a podcast talks about it with ex-wrestlers or those who've walked away from the industry. It's very well known. And then you look at wrestlers who left WWE or whatever, and again, recreational issues, addictions with alcohol and drugs, steroid problems. Scott Steiner, his biceps are wrong. You know he's a roid monkey. As is my terminology. You know he's on the steroids, he's on the juice. It's pitifully embarrassing because there's no doubt in real life, away from wrestling, if he hadn't been a wrestler, he would have been just your average Joe, nice bloke, probably an American football fan, probably your typical American, goes to a sports bar, watches the ice hockey or the NFL, but would be great fun and a laugh to talk to. He would be an average Joe. You put him in professional wrestling, and Vince McMahon, that drive for winning big, big and physical, need to throw. And then you listen to all the steroids trial of '94. Those allegations carried on into the 2000s and 2010s. And yes, the British Bulldog and others who died young. And then I look at allegations surrounding players in rugby league and rugby union and the NFL. Big physical contact sports. And players getting banned and getting caught. And then I look at the peptide scandal we had a decade ago in the AFL and NRL, involving the Essendon Bombers in the AFL and the Cronulla Sharks in the NRL, and then individuals at other clubs. And I'm thinking, there's clearly a culture there as well that bigger is better. We need to bulk up quick. We're going to have these experimental supplements programs. No, but it relates because a lot of these high-profile wrestlers, some of them were, like Ronda Rousey, for example, professional athletes. They have agents or sports agencies that represent them to get them these contracts and deals. And then they might share a rehabilitation centre. So Ryan Pappenhausen, for example, has gone to the same rehabilitation centre that Bowen Byram, who's an NHL player, is going to. And there's an NFL player who's there right now, and Latrell Mitchell went there. There's a guy in California who deals with injury rehabilitation, specifically involving your legs, so like knee injuries, calf muscles, hamstring problems, ankle ligament injuries, do with the lower half of the body. And he's internationally recognised. I believe wrestlers and MMA fighters go there as well, either out their own pocket or their professional promotional sports team, the support team will go, look, we'll pay for you to go here. But the interesting talking point is the recreational drug use and the sexual misconduct allegations, the racism allegations. When you have a toxic culture, we started off with the Hearns with snooker and darts and boxing, the McMahons in wrestling, for example. We're talking about, Ronaldo, for example, a toxic culture may not. You take that toxicity out of the dressing room, the team improves. So when you have a culture that is toxic, it doesn't matter if it's a sports promoter or a sports governance or a individual athlete or athletes. It's interesting. Look, I watched wrestling as an adult. I just found that the industry had so much scandal, and then the Chris Benoit moment changed the landscape of wrestling, pro wrestling, as sports entertainment. Doesn't matter how you look at it, with the kayfabe and all that. But the Chris Benoit incident was the turning point. We had the WCW, WWF at the time, Monday Night Wars, which was the 90s and the early 2000s was fantastic growing up as a kid and a teenager watching it. We had the Attitude Era with WWF, WWE when it changed name. We had the rise of TNA with this octagonal, six-sided or eight-sided ring or whatever it was, the X Division, slightly smaller wrestlers doing some real ridiculous moves, which was fantastic and really entertaining. And then we have some high-profile. Eddie Guerrero dies. I think he was aged. I think was he 37 or 39? He died young, not much older than me. Died young. And then the Chris Benoit incident happens, and the handling of that, and that changed everything. Changed everything. And it's definitely. And then what's happened since then is we've had a change in direction from all the wrestling promotions, making watering down some of the storylines and the content, and putting in some more safety features like no real headshots and steel chairs anymore. Which, bearing in mind, you shouldn't be doing anyway, because bashing your head a lot will kill you. The Chris Benoit 2007 was the turning point for pro wrestling, but also the domination of what was WWF, which became WWE. There was a decline in viewership, fan base, and the WWE network, and there's been there's been some decisions taken at board level that leave you going, what the hell is going on? Vince McMahon has taken it in a very interesting direction. But it is also interesting what sports rise and fall, yes. And you look at the Chris Benoit incident, you also look at the economic situation since 2007. How football, soccer, depending on where you are in the world, and obviously there will be people who will watch this live stream later on with the replay, has kept on, growing, where other sports have contracted or flatlined, should I speak, and had to look at their expenditure and go, yeah, we can't, expand as rapidly. Is interesting. but yeah, boxing is in crisis. And other martial arts, individual martial arts, are in crisis. You mix them together as MMA, and you legalize violence, and you have someone like Dana White and Joe Rogan going, "Here you go." And you have the rise of social media and some really dopey people and controversy. Suddenly, it becomes popular. It's just what you would see on a Friday night, just without the alcohol and the weapons, and it is legalized violence. If you would do that to someone on a Friday night, in a bar or a pub or a nightclub, you're going to prison. Um, yeah, look, look, you have got amateur wrestling as an Olympic sport, and look, Kurt Angle obviously wins Olympic gold in '96 with a broken neck. Let that sink in. Um, so if I had tickets, what would I go and see between MMA, wrestling, and boxing? Well, I've got friends who wrestle in the independent circuit here in the UK, and I've got friends who box professionally, and I've got two friends who own martial arts and boxing gyms and run them. So I'm at a bit of a toss up there. I want to go and support my friends, either in whatever capacity, and see them do well. And I have said to one of my friends who is a pro boxer that I will go and obviously give him that support in the crowd and go. At the same time, I have a lot of respect for them, but in reality, other than I've got individual friends involved in martial arts and pro wrestling, the indie circuit, and boxing, they're not involved with a promotion or an event. I'm not going. You gave me free tickets, and my friend isn't there as a trainer or as a fighter or as a wrestler. I am not going. My friend is not on the card that night in any capacity. I'm not going. What's the point? What is the point? The only reason I would go is if this channel got big enough and I was invited by, on a personal level, by a friend who was either promoting or whatever, or a business side of things. Um, that might change things if there was a commercial aspect for me going, partly for the channel benefit. But in reality, on the personal aspect, I probably wouldn't go, if I'm being brutally honest. Um, the fact that I've criticised MMA and boxing so viciously on this channel, it would be really hypocritical of me to go, in all honesty, considering my views now to what they were a decade ago in regards to these sports, and how my views have changed for a variety of reasons. It would be really, really interesting for me to go. Oh, bear in mind, I spent the last X amount of years bashing this sport for a variety of issues that have befallen the sport for whatever reason, drug use or domestic violence allegations or corruption or whatever it may be. Oh, by the way, I'm in attendance. My money that I've just spent, well, I've been given a ticket regardless, and I'm spending money at the event is going into the pockets of the same people I've just criticised. That would be a hypocritical of me, and I wouldn't have a leg to stand on personally. And if I haven't got a friend involved, why would I be there? Because I'll be supporting my friend. I wouldn't be supporting the sport. If they go, look, I've got your tickets, mate. I want you there for the support side of it. And, whatever. And, yeah, I'll go. My mate Darren was like, look, I've got a fighter. Boxing, it's a professional bout. He's on the undercard of a European or Commonwealth or world title or whatever it is. I would go. If my mate Mo was to go, look, I've got a fighter. He's appearing in Bellator in London at the O2, or UFC London at the O2, or Crucible Theatre in Sheffield, or Copper Box Arena, whatever arena they're using. For example, I've got tickets. I would like you to go. Then yeah, absolutely, I'm supporting my friend because they've invested time in training and doing it all. Um, but in reality, other than that, I would, if someone offered me tickets and I didn't have a friend involved in that promotion, I'm not going. Um, but that's my personal opinion because it's so hypocritical for me to go willingly, um, where I've got no involvement on a personal level with anyone involved in the promotion of that event. Um, and even on a corporate side of things, actually, if it was a business transaction, I would still be like, do I really want to go? Even if the person who is taking me, let's say I'm doing an interview with it's hypothetical. Um, let's say another sports journalist is like, look, or an ex-athlete or a pro athlete who I've been interviewing, or an ex-athlete goes, I'll grant you an interview, but as a thank you for taking time out of your day, whatever. I've got your tickets, by the way. I've been invited to go, or my agent's got us a gig, or I've got to do some media stuff because my agent also is the agent for this boxer or MMA fighter, whatever sports agent. There you go. Okay. Major League Baseball, NFL. Well, look, if I can sit through 5 days of a test match, I could probably sit through a couple of hours of NFL NFL action. Baseball, the amount of time it takes to complete a baseball match is a bit longer. But again, if I can sit through a day's test cricket at Lords, I'm sure I could possibly sit through a baseball or NFL game. But I wouldn't be as involved if, let's say, it was a rugby league international or rugby union international. I've been to club football and rugby union, and ice hockey and rugby league, I think, are more my thing. The amount of ice hockey matches I've been to, I'm talking nearly 300 games here over a lengthy spell, obviously. But if we're talking football, we're talking about 30, 40. Snooker, snooker or darts. I'm a better snooker player than I'm a darts player. I used to be a pretty decent pool player as an amateur. I've got friends who send me pro in that regard. But because of my ADHD, I'm too much of a fidget. And with snooker, you've got to be not a fidgety fan. And that's the problem. I can watch on the TV, but I'll tune out if there's a slow technical frame rather than a quick 147, or they're doing break for break. It's entertaining. I am very, very with ADHD. I'm a bit of a twitch, a bit of a fidget, and snooker is one of those sports where you've got to be quiet for maybe 20, 30, 40 minutes if it's a very tactical frame. Darts, short, sharp. There's your 180, there's your 140. A set could last not very long. You have a nine dart finish within 2 minutes. So again, I'm more of a view it on TV kind of fan with snooker, because unfortunately I'm a bit too much of a fidget to be actually in, let's say, the Crucible or the O2 or wherever they're, whatever arena, Wembley, for example, arena they're using. Which is a shame, but it's the truth. I'm too much of a fidget, and therefore it does become an unnecessary distraction for players. You have to have respect for the players, and that obviously isn't fair. But that's, again, in a perfect world, if I wasn't a fidget, I'd quite happily go to a day's play at the Crucible or something. I would enjoy snooker more than darts. But that's a perfect world. It's not a perfect world, so I'd rather watch on TV. And don't get me wrong. Look, I've been a football, been a rugby union, I've been a ice hockey, and obviously you've got atmosphere, you've got chanting, you've got action happening constantly. It's in their more fast-paced sports. It's cricket, where it's a bit more relaxed with the atmosphere at Lords. But if you're at the Oval, the Barmy Army, it's going to be constant in the background with the fans on it. The atmosphere between Lords and the Oval is different. So I've been to some really famous sporting venues in this country. But no, the darts, I don't drink anymore. So putting me in that kind of environment is just, I'm going to be walking out the door very, very quickly. And as an ex-barman, I cannot stand piss heads. Yeah, I've been the drinker. And yeah, darts crowds are just, unfortunately, it's that lads drinking culture, which I never was a big fan of. I mean, yeah, I've gone out with a night out with my mates and we've had a laugh, but it's when you've got that, what I call uh, daily Star or Daily Mirror kind of reading, or the Sun kind of reading, knuckle dragging, xenophobic idiot, which is what, unfortunately, the stereotype of dart fans are. They're not like that, obviously. They're not all knuckle dragging idiots. Unfortunately, there is the drink culture, and the organisers, the Hearns, have played into that kind of drink culture since they've been involved in darts promotion with the PDA and the BDO. And I remember the days at obviously Lakeside when you had that smoky haze in the background before the smoking ban in 2007. I remember, like, players actually having a fag on the hockey, and having a dart. While playing darts, they're having a dart, which is a good bit of slang, bit of humour there, bit of a pun. And then 2007 happens, and so in order to maximise things, they increase the drinks promotions. Yes, Gerwyn Price. He doesn't come across as a very likable individual, though. And he has come out with some statements online and in interviews that are inflammatory. But there's nothing in the rules to say he can't do it. I have seen players use the little earplugs, the little earbud plugs before, to lower the level of noise. There's nothing in the rules to say he can't do it. Now, whether the PDA and the BDO, both promotions globally, and the World Darts, so the World to the Worlds, which is all the international players, whether the governing bodies bring in rules to ban it, there's nothing against the rules to say can't do it. Now, the problem then arises: what happens if you've got a player with a hearing issue, where they've got tinnitus, and they have to have some kind of medical exemption, but they have to have use earplugs or ear defenders, or WDF, or whatever, or the BDO's no longer at Lakeside, but you know what I mean, the governing body kind of thing. There's no, as I say, there's nothing in the rules against it. However, if they decide on a rule change, there's going to be a player or players with medical who are going to bring up a medical exemption because they've got hearing damage, or they've got a sensory issue where they've got partial hearing or tinnitus, or something like that, whereby you're going to have a grey area. He has played within the rules there. Now, unfortunately, he's not a very likable individual. We've had this discussion about darts before on live stream. The last one, I believe, we went into a lengthy discussion in regards to darts and the sleaze aspect of it. We're not going to go into those players who've done sleazy things. But again, the Hearns are involved in the sport. And yes, it did become a bit of an ongoing joke online. And I was part of that joke because I kept spreading the memes because they were quite funny. It was a lot of my work colleagues are darts fans. Some of them play in the local leagues within the various professional and semi-pro and amateur structure. But as I say, he was within the rules to do it. And I have seen players in the past who've used the little earbud, earplugs to block out either the noise, or they might have tinnitus, or whatever it is, just to keep them focused. And it is within the rules. No, there was some really unsight. I mean, I'm not a darts fan anymore. I didn't watch the footage, but I've read, obviously, the reasons why. I've seen snippets and clips, and you can hear it. He doesn't help himself with some of his inflammatory comments. What also I find disturbing is, look, you got to take a bit of chirping from fans, a bit of heckling from fans. In any sport, you're going to get those funny chants taking the piss out of the player or the team. But the personal attacks upon his family, especially his kids, online, and the threats they have received, much like Harry Maguire with the bomb threat last year, much like what I believe some other high-profile players, past and present, have had, and it's not just a social media thing. This Neil Lennon got sent death threats via post. He was Celtic manager. Bullets were sent to him. We're going to gun down your family. We're going to. I see this. We've got one with your name on it. That kind of thing. This has happened in sport before. Unfortunately, the security at the event and the organisers have failed there in going, right, you out, go. That's the security side of things. He hasn't helped himself, though, which doesn't excuse the verging on racist or nationalistic abuse he received because he's Welsh. Doesn't help. The booing side of things, I don't mind that. He's a very unpopular, divisive player. You've got to take a little bit of, feedback from fans if you've said something inflammatory. You have been a bit of a dick. Like it's like Nick Kyrgios in tennis, very divisive, talented, no doubt. Gervin Price, talented player in his chosen discipline. The xenophobic side of things is where there's the issue. I've been at a match where we were booing Alan Smith for like the 45 minutes he's on the field. Southampton Leeds back in the day when I was a teenager. He got sent off as well, but he also scored Leeds 2 goals. They were, because he was suspended for the following, I think, 4 games. They got relegated. He was their best player that season. Alan Smith doesn't get relegated. Alan Smith doesn't get suspended. I think Leeds stay up in the season they're relegated from the Premier League. But that is another thing. There were chants about Peter Ridsdale. There were chants about the situation at Leeds United. And of course, Alan Smith was a very divisive player when he was playing for Leeds and Man United. It's fact. Even he obviously ended his career as not at Notts County and was much beloved in the lower leagues. When he was in the Premier League with Leeds and Man United, he was a feisty attacking midfielder, centre forward. He had a lot of red cards in his career. He was a gnarly player. He was an agitator. Ultimately, he was a very skillful player. Horrible injury derailed his career. Never fully reached that peak again. But when he got sent off for Leeds United, we gave him tons of abuse. And of course, Leeds ultimately go on to lose the game. So Hampton were relegated shortly after Leeds, a few seasons later. So, let that be what it is. And had similar struggles getting back to the Premier League. Not as long, but they had similar struggles. And also ended up in League One at one point. So, it is what it is. But when you start bringing the racism or the homophobia into it, which we've seen at football, and then you bring in sexism if it's a female athlete, that's where the security needs to do something. And if there's police at a venue or a match, they need to go, right, you're getting nicked, son. You've had it. We've got you on camera. We've got you. We don't need to have a complaint from the victim. You're done, mate. You'll be charged with a section, public order offence, subsection, whatever. In regards to how they format darts, it's irrelevant to me. But Gerwyn Price, divisive figure, he's got to take some what I call jeering from the fans or sledging, an Aussie way of doing things. There's the banter. He's got to take a bit of booing. The xenophobia and the other abuse he and his family have received is, not particularly pleasant, but it's unfortunately a part and parcel of professional sport. Why does racing homophobia and sexism persist in sports crowds? The majority of it's football. We've seen little bits in rugby league and little bits in ice hockey and American football around the world. But European football especially, it's a lot of it's to do with high-profile people in the media criticising, again, the Andrew Tate thing, right? High-profile people, individual high-profile personalities, I think is a good way of doing it, espousing certain views. And then you have what I'm seeing, whereby she's female, she's from a minority background, be it sexual orientation or national background, colour of one's skin. We've got to have them on the TV. That tick box agenda. There's pushback against that, but when it's predominantly football and to a certain extent rugby league in the UK. I've seen it in the US, well, the North American sports with the NHL in a small minority of idiotic incidents. I've seen it. Basically, I think we should be allowed to criticise the commentators and the pundits if they're crap. I couldn't give a toss about their gender or the colour of their skin. Unfortunately, there are those that go, you must be a racist or a sexist or a... I'm like, no, that particular journalist isn't very good at his or her job. And I've regularly criticised many a male commentator and many a male pundit and presenter. Jake Humphrey's absolutely useless. Thank God BT Sport had him. Couldn't stand him on the BBC. Bye-bye. He was useless with the F1 coverage. He was useless with Football Focus. He was useless with Match Today. Have him. My license fee is not paying his wages. Have him. Um, I'm a big fan of Claire Balding. I'm a big fan of like Deal Dobbin, minority background. Mika Richards, minority background. Massive fan of Susie Perry, but she knows her stuff. I mean, she's a motorsport through and through. Massive fan of Susie Perry. Have been for 25 years. Yes, I had a poster of Susie Perry on my wall as a teenager. She's 10 years younger than me mum, so she's not much younger than me mum. But Susie Perry, we're growing up. Yeah, but she knows her stuff. Not only is she stunning to look at, she's also bloody intelligent. Claire Balding, sporting background, was an eventer, so equestrianism. Gabby Logan, not only is her husband an ex-rugby union international, she herself was an international gymnast. She knows her stuff. She's been doing sports presenting now almost pretty much since she retired. Hazel Irvine, been presenting sports for years. She does the rugby union fantastically well. Fantastically well. Claire Balding should tick every single box apart from the race quota because she's a lesbian, she's female, and she's bloody good at what she does. I do think, especially when it comes, women's rugby union seems not to have this problem. It seems to do rather well. Women's rugby league seems to do rather well. Women's football, I think, is where the issue lies. And we're talking about homophobia and racism in crowds. The sport comes up more than once. Social media is where a lot of these, what I call armchair critics, who probably can't spell, they can't, and they don't know the history of anyone else apart from their own little club in their own little island. In, I'm going to say, let's go the East Midlands, let's go London, let's go Birmingham. I don't care where it is. Sonny, why female fans feel disengaged. I wouldn't say they're a bit more middle class. Rugby league is just as working class, but there's less criticism of rugby league. There is more acceptance of female officials officiating men's games. Seen that. There is more acceptance of female assistants in the sense of coaching and physiotherapy and female presenters and commentators. I couldn't criticise the BBC's coverage when it came to the commentators. When it came to the production values of the BBC Rugby League World Cup, it was below par. But in regards to the men's side of it, the commentary was fine. The women's side of it was atrocious, but that's because all the best commentators were over in Australia and they only had Andrew Voss for us. So when you've only got Vossi coming over from down under, there's your problem. I think in regards, I think you can. I think Claire Balding has been criticised for a few of her misses along the way, but she's had a broadcasting career that spans 30 years. She's still got an involvement with equestrianism and horse racing because of her brother and her family. Gabby Logan's had a few blunders along the way. But again, very long career. Sue Barker's had a very long career. And of course, she's no longer doing the Wimbledon coverage, which is very sad. It is. But she was one of the best female players in tennis this country's ever produced, ever. Let that sink in. Sue Barker was a brilliant broadcaster. And I think the BBC have made a mistake. I think she should have said, I'm retiring when I feel I'm ready to. When we get to women's football, I don't mind watching it. I think it's refreshing to see how they play the game. I think they play the game in the right way. There's none of the diving and simulation. It's never going to make the same amount of money as the men's game. We have to accept that. It is a different style of play. You have to treat it as almost a separate brand new sport that you're watching for the first time. But it's a good way to learn the rules. If let's say you're an American fan, and you don't even watch the women's national side in the US, and you want to learn the game and understand the intricacies of it, watch the women's game. It's a great viewpoint to understand how the game is played. If you're new to the sport, ironically. Same with rugby union, rugby league. I would actually recommend to new fans, especially to rugby league, which is trying to grow its profile globally, to watch the women's game. There's a few little rule variations, but the sheer basics, the tackle technique's better. The ruck area is better. The kicking game is not as good, but the sheer basics. If you are a new fan, I would suggest watching women's rugby league. Rugby league. I would actually suggest watching women's rugby union as well, because they do the basics better. I believe it's like a throwback in time to 25 years ago, with rugby union. But rugby league, I think it's because the game is a little bit slower paced. You can pick up things as a new fan easier. And if you want to encourage your kids to play, you can sort of understand the game a little bit more because it's played about lesser intensity, or not intensity, but slower pace. Um, Especially the NRLW. I'll suggest any new fan to the game watch that first. Watch a couple of games of that, if it's and then go into the men's game, the evening game. So the women's game is generally played first, if it's a double header on the broadcast sheet. If the women's game is being played first, it's a good little soft introduction to. Hang on a second, we've got the Friday night game or the Thursday night game, the big box office match. And then you go, oh God. And then you realise how brutal the men's game is. The women's game is not far behind. But um, as I say, I think you can criticise if you know what you're talking about. And a lot of people are armchair critics who either A, haven't played any sport since they were at school, B, probably are unfit, and C, are probably middle aged and white and male. But I've also seen a fair few female people online openly criticising whatever it may be. I felt the women's Euros last summer was fantastic. I felt the crowd numbers were good. Could have been better, but were good. And then people were like, oh yeah, but they're discounting the price of tickets or they're giving free tickets away. It's irrelevant. The highest crowd numbers ever. They surpassed any previous Women's World Cup or Euros ever. The viewership figures on TV back it up. Oh, and they're doing better than the men. And I think a lot of men feel threatened by a successful. Basically, in reality, they probably like a bit of pegging. They're probably a bit submissive. And I'm tongue in cheek, but these Andrew Tate style ultra masculine, sexist types who they're very insecure about themselves. They're the toxic masculinity. A positive masculinity is going, right, that woman's hurt, let's help her. Let's call out domestic violence. Let's call out homophobia and sexism in the workplace or in sport or in society. Let's be good role models for our young people, especially young men. Toxic masculinity is like women belong in the kitchen. I want my sandwiches. I want my cup of coffee when I get in from work. I want dinner on the table by this time. Why are the kids? That to me, the 1950s. Some of these people were clearly born in what I call the boomer generation. They were born in the 50s to 70s. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think a lot of men underreport problems in relationships because they're scared of the perception of them being weak and not masculine. I think there's a positive masculine role model and negative. Sport is a good way of doing the positive sides. Men's sport, I mean, it's also to do with the media, and I think the media have a big part to play when it comes to I mean, rugby league, I think, is ahead of rugby union, which is ahead of football when it comes to female officials. Rugby league is far ahead, far, far ahead. We've now had in both the Super League and the NRL female referees officiating men's games and doing a better job than the men. I haven't heard the level of criticism in rugby league. Ice hockey, we've had female refs and linos, not necessarily NHL level, but have refs the game and officiated the game. No, women do. Women definitely do. I don't think you see the amount of effort women put into tarting themselves up. I say tart. Oh, look at the dress I bought. Look at it's not for me because I know I'm going to see them naked at the end of the night in relationships. It's to show off to other women. Oh, look at me. I'm the dominant alpha female. Honestly, you've not been on a night out in about 20 years then. Netball, I think they're more constructive in their criticism in a nicer way. I think it's the culture of the sport because it's a female-only sport. Men don't play it, and I don't know how many male fans there are of netball. Um, I never really had any. So here's the thing: it's a female-dominated sport, much like all the sports we discuss are predominantly male-dominated when it comes to the professional side of it and the history of those sports. Um, and so maybe their criticism is dealt with in a different way. But I tell you now, if you've ever seen two women fight on a Friday night, it's brutally terrifying. And obviously, when women gossip, that's their version of criticism. They will be the most backstabbing people you'll ever find. And that's a social thing. I think where we're at over the last few years, there has been a forced shift in the media, which I don't agree with. It should be a natural shift. Natural shift. Now, on the netball side of things, the UK and Jamaica are world leaders, which is fantastic. A small nation like Jamaica, outside of athletics, and the UK, where the sport's bloody invented, being world leaders in the top few nations in the world is fantastic. I think the way the sport is played in what I call the right way. And I say that controversial athletes damage the brand. It's more of a family orientated sport where your dad or your brother will come along and support, or your son would come along and support you if you, or your brother and your dad would come along if you're the female athlete, or your son and husband, for example. Netball sees itself more as a family sport, and I think it's netball's one of those sports which has done very well to promote itself and grow. Look, I haven't really seen the media coverage, and I can't comment on how they would break down the. It's not a sport I would watch because it's similar to basketball. It has the same origins, it's played on the same court, in a sense. Um, so for me, it's not a sport that I have an interest in. I'm not saying, you know, it's a bad sport. I think it's a great sport where female sports fans can feel comfortable without the boorish, laddish behaviour of a minority of male sports fans. Let's be honest. And I think it can show how sport can be governed, how it can be played, and how the analysing of the sport, be it on social media or on the mainstream media, can be done where other sports can learn from it. Uh, I think professional netball, though, builds upon those building blocks that you get in the educational system when it's played at school and college and university. Builds upon those building blocks. Um, and it has the same origin as basketball. It's played on the same kind of court size. It's just the female. It was basically what should have been the female. In regards to basketball, look, it was one of those sports we had to play at school until the age of I think 11. I never enjoyed it. Um, it wasn't a sport for me. There were some of my friends who really enjoyed it, did rather well. Um, but it wasn't a sport for me because I enjoy playing it. I don't really enjoy watching it. Look, take nothing away from the athletes that play basketball, both men's and women's disciplines. They are fantastic. You've got to be seriously athletic to play that sport. Seriously, you've got to have great cardio, great mobility. It does help if you're 7 foot tall in certain positions on the basketball court. Not every player is a giant. Some of them are actually smaller. Still, they're 6'2". The smaller players are still over 6 foot. That's thinking. Or high 5'11", 5'12". The pace of the game is fine. I think the scoring is ridiculous, and it's not a sport that I find entertaining personally. I have done videos on the NBA. I've got friends who are massive basketball fans, and fair play to them. I have nothing against basketball per se. It's just not a sport I enjoy. Never got into it playing it. Didn't enjoy watching it. It's just how it is. Yes, obviously, I am the Space Jam generation, Michael Jordan, Space Jam 1996. There was an explosion in interest in the sport of my age group here in Europe because of Space Jam, because Warner Brothers cartoon, big thing. Second Space Jam wasn't as good with LeBron, but that's personal opinion. So yes, I am the Space Jam generation. I'm also the Mighty Ducks generation as well. Massive explosion in those sports, especially in Western Europe, but across Europe, with a new generation of fans. Even though basketball and ice hockey is very popular in Central and Eastern Europe anyway, an added explosion in the west of Europe and the north of Europe for those sports. Fantastic. Um, but at the same time, certain sports are trying to grow their fan base globally and also nationally in a certain extent or regionally in more recent times, which is what Major League Baseball are trying to do with the London series. What Rugby League are trying to do with taking the World Cup to France, which without the French involvement, as I said in my earlier video earlier today, the history of Rugby League in France, without them, we don't have a Rugby League World Cup. Ironically, without the French, from a sporting standpoint, we don't have the IOCs, we don't have the modern Olympic movement, both Summer and Winter Olympics, and we don't have the FIFA World Cup as it currently is with Gilles Rimet. Did a video on him 4 or 5 years ago. So the French imprint on professional international sport cannot be understated. It's not much like with the Brits inventing so many sports that other nations do better than us. Without the UK and France, we don't have all these international sports that we love and cherish today. The Canadians invented basketball. The reason why the NBA exists is because of the NHL and NHL owners wanting to make extra revenue with their buildings. So the dual use building, where an NHL arena like Madison Square Garden will also host NBA teams. Let that sink in. Staples Center in LA. Right? Without the NHL, basketball and the NBA would not have the same imprint it does today. There you go. That's two sports coexisting. To a certain extent, they're also rivals for the same fan dollar, but they coexisted to begin with quite well. But Harry, it's great to see a new person in the chat. Fantastic. Welcome to the channel, by the way. European Nations Cup French. Henri Delon, I think so. I could be wrong. I'll have to check into that. He could be a Huguenot, so a French expat who's or someone of the ancient regime whose obviously family may have gone over to the UK or North America to escape the French revolutions, be it Napoleon First or Napoleon III, because there was political upheaval. And of course, the Bourbon Restoration. That's another, again, videos for the other channel. Stop taking me off onto political and historical stuff because it does link in. Like Gordon Darcy, the rugby union Irish ex-international, Huguenot descent, French Protestants or Catholic dissenters who fled persecution in France and ended up either in the UK and Ireland or in Germany, ironically, or South Africa. There's a lot of the Afrikaners have Huguenot ancestry. There are a lot of the Franco-Dutch Protestants. Yes, that is a thing. A lot of Huguenots, be it British or Franco-Dutch, ended up actually in South Africa. It's a big thing. Like Francois as a first name, even though there's Steyn. Francois Steyn, for example. There you go. The De Villiers, ironically, is a French name. We have the Villiers family here, Dukes of Buckingham. Oh, yes. Buckingham. Three Musketeers. That George Villiers, ironically, his name is of French Huguenot origin. And De Villiers is the Franco-Dutch branch of the family. Then you've got A.B. de Villiers, the cricketer, and you've got multiple de Villiers who played for the Springboks as well. Guess what? It's a Huguenot name. So there you go. And there's a sporting connotation to it with A.B. de Villiers. There you go. Or Francois Steyn in rugby union. Had to get that in there. So if you are an Afrikaner, you'll very likely have some Huguenot Protestant ancestry somewhere through the Dutch or Franco-Dutch kind of Low Countries. I love getting distracted by this. But yeah, Gordon Darcy, very famous Irish Huguenot, and then yeah, in France, basketball, volleyball, and handball work together. In Britain, indoor sports don't. Again, funding. Funding is another one. Um, I think ice hockey is the most popular indoor sport, arena sport that we have in the UK. We have a pretty decent professional structure. Could be better, but we bloody invented the sport, and we won Olympic gold in the sport. So let that sink in. People forget that we won an Olympic gold and a couple of silvers and bronzes in the Winter Olympics when it comes to ice hockey. And we've got some pretty decent players um, at professional level. Do you think a lot of sports people get depression? Yes, they do. It's a well-known fact. A lot of them have struggles adjusting to post-retirement. It's been really well documented in the last 20 years. Um, and a lot of them also have addiction issues as well, for a variety of reasons. I wouldn't say every single athlete, but a fair few of them have gone through that cycle. I've watched a lot of documentaries on it. I think France likes to be good at those sports. In England, we're so behind; it's not worth wasting money on it. Well, it's to do with long-term investment going back generations. The differences with the UK and mainland Europe, where indoor sports are more popular, is the reconstruction efforts after World War II. Also, how their education systems work, where French schools, for example, don't have playing fields. They have a little basketball court in the middle of like a square of buildings. It is different. And of course, the reconstruction efforts, um, they focus a lot on urban redevelopment and gymnasium, which is obviously a German school system, which is the highest level of secondary school. Because there's three levels of secondary school. You've got the lower levels, middle level, and gymnasium is the top level of German secondary education. There's three. Gymnasium, we call it the gym, where you work out. Gymnasium is a Latin word, and getting really. Um, Schools doubled up as fencing clubs and handball and real tennis. And so in Germany, gymnasium obviously means school for those students who've been geared up to go to university. And you look at old school gymnasia in Germany, they had fencing clubs, they had boxing clubs, cycling, swimming. A lot of the major sports clubs that we see in Germany today, a lot of their early members came through the gymnasium level of secondary education in Germany. So we have obviously sixth form and technical college, BTEC. Germany, they have the gymnasium, and then they have the two lower levels of secondary education where, like, you're going into the trades, or you may do a technical qualification at university, or you're going to go to university, whatever, you've got to get a certain grade to get in. But yes, so the gymnasium aspect, as we call modern gymnasiums here, the gym. It's actually through the German education system that we have the gymnasium, and also the Latin, Greco-Latin word gymnasium as well, but indoor training exercise, that kind of thing. And the social aspect of it. No, it's from gymnasium, the Latin word. Gymkhana is different, although that may have its origins, ironically, in Greco-Roman with Alexander the Great and obviously the Silk Road. And stop with the history. I know we're getting divergent here. I'm watching the chat. I'm watching you taking off. This is ADHD at its best, and worst. Getting distracted off point. But no, the sports side of it um, is linked there because the classrooms doubled up as indoor facilities for fencing and other what we would class as more upper class sporting pursuits. But they would also have the swimming club, cycling, um, and ironically, yeah, it's transcended across the community sports club kind of dynamic across Europe is more the way. Like France and Spain and Portugal and Germany and Scandinavia have the sports club where the ice hockey team, the football club, the handball, the bandy, shinty, or whatever sport it is, cycling, swimming, everyone's a member. And then Barcelona, for example, is a multi-sport club. What's the one? There's one in TPK is a famous Finnish multi-sport club in Finland, where they play uh, bandy, which is a similar form to ice hockey. Ice hockey, they play football, they play basketball, and they're one of the biggest sports clubs in Finland. Okay. What would you say people are more disinterested in sport compared to they play? Would I say that? I would say certain sports have had a rise in popularity and other sports have declined in popularity. Rugby league, I did the history of rugby league video earlier in France. Catalan Dragons have appeared in 2 Challenge Cup finals, 11 years apart. The attendances of both are stark. Sold out Wembley, half of Wembley empty. So 80,000, 50,000 for allocation for ticket sales. Yet Catalan appeared in 2 Challenge Cup finals. So I don't understand that. So for those organisers and those individuals that blame because a French team are playing, look at the previous Challenge Cup final. There was other circumstances at play. Is it the economic downturn that we've seen in that period of time? Is it because the sport itself is not great at promoting itself? Ticket price, you know, various things. So I think also what we're seeing is people in my age group, what I call the 18 to 30 club demographic, are less likely to pay for a subscription sports service on TV. However, we are more likely to pay for an internet sports subscription. I do. I've got my NRL subscription through the NRL website. I've got my Supercars subscription through their YouTube channel, so I can watch actual V8 Supercars live, apart from the Melbourne race because of TV deal with F1. It's a support package on the Melbourne Grand Prix weekend. I can watch every single V8 Supercars race in full, plus the whole race weekend, including free practice, qualifying, and the support races. You know, everything for £5.99 a month. For 130 quid a year, £130 a year, I can watch every single NRL, NRLW, State of Origin, mid-season tests, chat show, documentary, the whole lot, NRL 360, the whole lot, £12.50 a month. I believe it's going to go up in May when I renew my subscription, but not a lot of money when it breaks down. That's why I pay a one-off yearly subscription. I could do it weekly, I could do it monthly. It actually ends up costing me more to do that way. They want you to do it that way, but I do it for the bang. I'm doing it for the whole 12 months. I could do the same with the AFL if I really wanted to, and I'd rather not. And I could do it, you know, for V8 Supercars on a different subscription service, but I'll stick with the YouTube for the membership because it's so much cheaper than actually paying for the ultimate subscription service, which costs a stupid amount of money that I just don't want. Yes, I pay for the TV license. I think I have to because a lot of the content I watch on the iPlayer, I've had neighbours who've had the old knock on the door, so I'd rather not have that. I've had to deal. My neighbours are dealing with bailiffs. Rather not have that. And again, it actually helps my credit rating. People fail to realise paying for your TV license and actually paying for your subs on time helps with your credit rating because you're paying a direct debit or a standing order monthly or yearly or however you pay for it. I do monthly. Ironically, I'm saving money by doing monthly as well. So there we go. Anyway, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you very much for all your views and questions. Great to see a new viewer there as well. And we can all agree or disagree on the TV licensing. I think the BBC needs to go down the advertising revenue like ITV. Personally, I think there are flaws with the system we have in place. I think Channel 4 gets money from the licensing money, and it's on a joint venture. It's not fully privatised, isn't fully public. But that's my view on the funding models for TV. I don't want to, however, I do not want us to end up like the US, which has gone full blown crap. So there is that. Anyway, thank you very much from me for all your questions. Very interesting live stream. We have covered a lot of diverse topics. Thank you very much. Thank you, comrades. We might have already hit 1,000. I just don't know. But for me, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for all your questions, and I'll see you all very, very, very soon.